Sherlock Holmes at Hogwarts. Chapter 1. Admission Letter. Kensington, Chelsea, Kings Road 128, second floor, master bedroom. For Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock received a strange letter. It was strange because logically, no one would specify the recipient's address to the extent of second floor, master bedroom when sending a letter. You couldn't expect the postman to deliver the letter directly to the bedroom, could you? But this letter actually arrived in Sherlock's bedroom. This is the second reason why it's strange. The letter's postman was an L. Yes, an L. Sherlock looked towards the top of the coat rack beside him. There stood a black and white patterned eagle owl. It was this eagle owl that had just flown in through the second floor window with the envelope in its beak, circled the room, and accurately dropped the letter into his hand. It was practically supernatural. Sherlock was naturally surprised at first. Anyone would be taken aback by such a thing. But unlike ordinary people, the excitement this event brought Sherlock quickly suppressed his surprise. Turning the envelope over, there was a dark red wax seal and a shield emblem, which looked quite striking. However, even more noticeable than those was a capital H letter, surrounded by a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. The patterns of the four animals were not distorted by the envelope's small space, instead, each was lifelike, as if about to jump off the paper. Sherlock took out a magnifying glass from the drawer and began to observe skillfully and meticulously. A pair of grey eyes shone brightly, and slightly trembling hands showed that his heart was not as calm as it appeared. Finally, Sherlock happily laughed out loud. Finally, something exciting has come along. The local criminals have been too unmotivated lately. In 1991, with the continuous acceleration of European Union integration, the EU member states unanimously accelerated their pace. Rumor has it that the European Community will pass the formal treaties of the European Economic and Monetary Union and the European Political Union by the end of this year. As one of the core member states, Britain, in order to show the former imperial glory and suppress its two main rivals, France and Germany, also increased its efforts to maintain domestic instability. In fact, large-scale criminal organizations had already almost disappeared from the British mainland by the end of the 20th century. Only street gangs remained, stubbornly demonstrating their presence. In this context, London, as the capital, was naturally the first to bear the brunt. Faced with such high pressure, the criminals all quieted down and temporarily stopped operating. In addition, he had just recovered from a serious illness not long ago, and his parents had also arranged a preparatory school for him. For Sherlock, who liked to pursue excitement and was tired of a peaceful life, this time of only being able to stay at home and wait for school to start naturally seemed increasingly boring. Until today. Of course, despite being very excited, Sherlock still carefully observed the envelope before opening it. This was a habit he had always cultivated. No postage stamp, emerald green ink, parchment paper, excessively thick paper. Interesting. Through observation, Sherlock had already reached a preliminary conclusion. However, further confirmation was needed through the main text of the letter. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. President of the International Confederation of Wizards, Order of Merlin First Class, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. Dear Mr. Holmes. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of required books and equipment. The term begins on September 1st. We await your reply by owl no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Before reading the letter, Sherlock had thought of many possibilities, but not this one. Hogwarts? Magic school? Grand Wizard? So, this is an admission letter? The content of the letter was so outrageous that even the always rational Sherlock couldn't help but fall into deep thought. As the letter said, there was a second page of stationery attached after the main text, which was a list of essential school supplies. Sherlock glanced at it and found things like wands, magic books, magic robes, etc., which only appeared in magical-themed literature and film and television works. Books such as the Standard Book of Spells and A History of Magic were even marked with the author's name. It's as if it's real. After a moment of silence, Sherlock held the letter up to the light. Ha! His eyes shone even brighter. If it were any other child, they would probably have already believed everything in excitement at this moment. However, the 11-year-old Sherlock Holmes was no ordinary person. He was much more mature than his peers. And a young man who firmly believed in science. Magic? How could something that only exists in legends really exist? So this must be a prank. Exquisitely made envelope? Can be forged. The content of the letter? Can be made up with a little thought. His own address? This is the easiest, even less effort than making up the content of the letter. The only doubtful point is the owl that delivers the letter. Before this, Sherlock had indeed never heard of them doing such a thing. This job was often undertaken by its relatives' pigeons. But not having heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. As long as you are willing to spend the effort, Sherlock felt that this was not impossible to do. The question is, would anyone really spend a lot of effort doing such a boring thing? The answer is yes. Because this kind of thing has happened before. Sherlock's dream used to be a pirate. This dream can certainly be called strange, but it is not unacceptable. After all, this is also part of the country's traditional culture. It was also during that time that Sherlock received a letter. Similar to this admission letter, but that time the letter was delivered by a proper postman. The writer claimed to be Captain Jack, and he said in the letter that he used to be a swashbuckling pirate leading many minions across the sea, robbing the rich and helping the poor, and was considered a prominent figure in a period. Unfortunately, he accidentally fell into the trap of another bad captain and was robbed of his beloved pirate ship. In the end, he was disheartened and ended up on the streets. He wrote to Sherlock because he found that Sherlock had the potential to become an excellent pirate, so he made a decision that violated his ancestors, to cultivate Sherlock as his successor. The purpose was to defeat the bastard who robbed him of his captain's ship and take back everything he once owned. At first, Sherlock refused. But as time went by, this Captain Jack eventually proved himself to Sherlock in various ways. You must know that Sherlock is not an ordinary child. Gaining his trust was not an easy thing to do in the first place. Because of this, Sherlock repeatedly tested and verified throughout the process, but found no flaws, and everything was fine. However, just when Sherlock finally believed the other party and made up his mind to follow Captain Jack on an adventure, he was told that this was a scam. This was nothing less than a bolt from the blue for him. Sherlock took a deep breath. There's no need to mention the past anymore. But people can't fall in the same place twice. Now Sherlock's reasoning and analysis skills are stronger than when he was young and ignorant. With the lessons learned from the past, he will naturally not be easily fooled this time. So even if common sense tells himself that owls won't deliver letters, based on the experience of being cheated last time, as long as he is willing to put in a lot of effort, it is not impossible to teach an owl to deliver letters. In order to play with his feelings, that person is happy to do it. Recalling this experience, Sherlock paced back and forth in the room. Finally, he made a not-so-difficult decision and took out paper to write quickly. Dear Professor McGonagall, I am honored to receive your school's admission notice, and I am also happy to go to your school to study. It's just that I and my family have never heard of magic matters before, and I don't know much about the admission preparation work. If your school can arrange for staff to come to our home to answer questions, I would be very grateful. Sherlock Holmes. A smile appeared on the corner of Sherlock's mouth. Since you want to pursue excitement, then carry it through to the end. The other party has already made a move, so he will play with him well. Unexpectedly, as soon as Sherlock had written the reply, the owl still on top of the coat rack immediately called out and fluttered its wings to come in front of him. So proactive. Sherlock tried to reach out, and it immediately took the letter, flapping its wings and flying out of the window. Observing its flying posture and speed, Sherlock couldn't help but sigh. Judging from the training results of this owl, a lot of effort has really been put into it. This alone is worth taking seriously. Based on his understanding of that person, the other party will definitely not give up so easily. In what way will he respond to himself? Is it to slowly gain his trust through letters? Or arrange for someone to pretend to be a teacher at a magic school? Or simply jump out and bluntly announce that this is a scam? Well, only this is unlikely after all. Both sides want to continue this contest. In any case, Sherlock is very much looking forward to what will happen next. At least, this summer won't be boring. It's just that Sherlock didn't expect the other party's response to come so quickly. 3 days after receiving the admission letter, Sherlock was having breakfast with his parents. Mrs. Holmes picked up the newspaper and glanced at it, then exclaimed to her husband, "Tarnan, the burglary case has been solved." Sherlock was right, the culprit is really that one-armed man. Mr. Holmes smiled and looked at his son. "I remember this was a case from 3 months ago." Sherlock put a piece of bread into his mouth and said indifferently, Scotland Yard's efficiency has always been like this, and they turn a blind eye to obvious facts. Scotland Yard is not a place name, but a synonym for the London Metropolitan Police Service. It is neither located in Scotland nor responsible for Scottish policing. The London Metropolitan Police Service is responsible for maintaining public order and traffic in the entire Greater London area except for the City of London. The old site is located at 4 Whitehall Street. Because one of its back doors faces Scotland Yard, and this door happens to be the public entrance to the London Metropolitan Police Service, over time, Scotland Yard has become a synonym for the London Metropolitan Police Service. Using place names to refer to institutions is not uncommon, such as Fleet Street, such as 10 Downing Street. Not only in the UK, but other countries also have this habit. For example, Sherlock, who is very interested in investigation, knows locations such as Lubyanka, 6 Doors, and West Eisvold Hotel. Mr. Holmes heard Sherlock's evaluation of Scotland Yard and couldn't help but suggest, "Sherlock, why don't you become a detective in the future?" Sherlock raised his eyebrows and did not answer. Just then, an eagle owl flew straight in through the open window. Chapter 2. Sherlock had excellent observation and memory skills. He immediately recognized the owl as the same one that had delivered the letter 3 days ago. Just like last time, it circled the room a few times and dropped the letter into Sherlock's hand with a soft thud. Mr. and Mrs. Holmes were instantly stunned. "Good heavens, Tannen, what am I seeing? An owl that delivers letters? This must be a hallucination. Oh, Holy Mary, Valida, I'd bet anything it's a messenger from God." Watching his wife constantly making the sign of the cross, Mr. Holmes shook his head and said, "Hey, my sweetheart, you're reacting like a crazy turkey. It's well known that messengers from God only come to earth when the end is near. Good heavens, why would you think that? That's a terrible thought, like Aunt Susan's apple pie. If you say that again, I swear I'll make you eat a piece." Mr. Holmes shrugged, no longer arguing with his wife. He turned to his son, "Sherlock, do you also think it's a messenger from God?" "No," Sherlock said coldly, "it's just an owl that's been trained to deliver letters." As he spoke, he opened the envelope. The reply was extremely simple. "I will come to visit at 9 o'clock, Minerva McGonagall." Hat. Sherlock couldn't help but chuckle. Interesting, it seems that guy is very confident in the actor he hired. He glanced at the time, it was 8:45. In a quarter of an hour, this person claiming to be Professor McGonagall would arrive. "Sherlock, what exactly is going on?" Faced with his parents' questions, Sherlock gently shook his head, "Let's let this guest explain it." After all, he was also curious to see this deputy headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. At exactly 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. "Hello, I am Minerva McGonagall, here to reply to your letter." A serious-looking woman appeared before the Holmes family. 5 minutes later, Professor Minerva McGonagall and the Holmes family were sitting neatly in the living room. McGonagall's first impression of Sherlock was good. Sherlock was taller than others of his age, so he looked slightly thin. Although his appearance wasn't particularly cute for a young boy, his features were firm and his facial angles were distinct. Especially his pair of grey eyes, which appeared particularly slender. Besides his eyes, his long, hooked nose was also quite striking. In short, Sherlock's appearance gave people a feeling of alertness and decisiveness, very much in line with McGonagall's image of a good student. After a brief greeting, McGonagall, with her decisive personality, got straight to the point. Every child with magical talent born in Britain is automatically added to the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry's admission list. When these children turn 11, they will receive an acceptance letter delivered by an owl. If the recipient fails to receive the letter, the owl will continue to deliver it until it is received. In addition to the acceptance letter, the letter also includes a list of required supplies, including uniforms, textbooks, cauldrons, wands, etc. For children from wizarding families, this is as common as eating and drinking. But for some people, they neither know they possess magic nor know of the existence of the magical world. In such cases, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will send faculty to visit their guardians, explain everything to them, and ensure they receive the message. However, Mr. Holmes is the first to actively request us to come. Speaking of this, McGonagall's appreciation for Sherlock grew even stronger. In McGonagall's view, any person with magical talent who doesn't receive a systematic magical education is a waste, even a crime. People in the Middle Ages were very afraid of magic. Many wizards, especially witches, were persecuted to varying degrees, some even losing their lives. Wizards at that time also lacked a complete education system. All wizarding children were taught magic at home by their parents. It was under these circumstances that Hogwarts came into being. It has now been around for thousands of years. Therefore, it is very encouraging that someone like Sherlock Holmes, born into a non-wizarding family, has such a keen interest in understanding the magical world. You know, every year during school admissions, some non-wizarding families turn pale at the mention of magic, avoiding it like the plague. Please, it's already 1991. The magical content in film and television works is based on reality, so why do these people still have this attitude towards magic? However, McGonagall, who is nearly 60 years old, is also very clear. Prejudice in people's hearts is a mountain, and no matter how hard you try, you can't move it. Even though the teachers at the magic school repeatedly emphasize that a wizard's magic will increase with age. If a young wizard still doesn't learn how to control magic by the time they reach the age of enrollment, their magic will surge out of control, and in severe cases, they may even pay with their lives. But even so, the idea that wizards equals evil still exists in some people's minds. So, after experiencing many setbacks, Hogwarts has established new rules. If these families, after learning the truth about the magical world, still do not want to enroll, then these children can continue to attend ordinary schools at home. This is equivalent to leaving life and death to fate, wealth to heaven. Of course, Hogwarts does not encourage this practice. This is the last choice in a truly helpless situation. But judging from Sherlock's own positive attitude, this situation should not occur. While McGonagall was observing Sherlock, the latter was also observing her. In fact, before McGonagall finished telling Sherlock and his parents about Hogwarts, Sherlock had already completed his analysis and judgment of McGonagall through observation. The result greatly surprised him. Because according to his judgment, the woman claiming to be Professor Minerva McGonagall was not lying. From a person's fleeting expressions, every twitch of their muscles, and every movement of their eyes, one can infer what they are thinking deep down. For someone who is well trained in observation and analysis, doing this is not difficult. Sherlock himself is precisely this kind of person. When the other party had just sat down and hadn't even started to get to the point, Sherlock had already judged her personality from her deep green robe without a single wrinkle, her neatly combed black hair tied into a high bun, and the light-reflecting square glasses. Serious, strict, and meticulous. If such a person wanted to lie, it would be easier to detect than for an ordinary person. Because of this, Sherlock began to doubt his previous judgment. If McGonagall wasn't lying, doesn't that mean this wasn't that person's arrangement? Magic really exists? When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sherlock couldn't help but mutter. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes, what did you say?" McGonagall looked at Sherlock, she didn't hear him clearly. Sherlock's parents also looked at him curiously. "No, it's nothing." Sherlock shook his head, then stared intently at McGonagall. There was a simplest way to prove whether magic really exists. "Professor, can you show us magic?" Hearing Sherlock's request, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes also looked at McGonagall with anticipation. Of course. McGonagall wasn't surprised at all by such a request. She would have found it strange if the other party hadn't made such a request, mainly because she was too experienced in dealing with such things. "If you agree." After receiving a positive answer, McGonagall took out a black wand and waved it elegantly. In the surprised gazes of the family of three, the teacup in front of Sherlock turned into an adorable little squirrel. "Oh, my God! Good heavens! Look, what am I seeing? This is so incredible!" The teacup actually turned into a squirrel. Compared to his extremely exaggerated parents, Sherlock was much calmer. Magic? Hypnosis? Or a trick? Even at this moment, Sherlock was still trying to explain everything that was happening from a scientific perspective. At this moment, the little squirrel that had transformed from the teacup shook its head and jumped into his open palm. Sherlock tried to stroke it. Very comfortable. The little fellow even rubbed against Sherlock's hand, the furry sensation instantly feeding back. The touch was very real. So, this is real, this is not a dream. Sherlock raised his head to look at McGonagall, making a final attempt. "Professor, can you turn it back?" "Of course." McGonagall waved her wand again, and the squirrel that was just in Sherlock's hand instantly turned back into a teacup. The tea was even still warm. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sherlock said this sentence for the second time. This time he was sure. This world, really has magic. This fantasy that should have belonged to humans truly exists. For Sherlock, this was undoubtedly a reconstruction of his worldview. However, once he accepted this setting, Sherlock's thinking immediately opened up. The exquisite envelope, the letter-delivering owl, the strange admissions method, all of these now had a reasonable explanation. This time, he really misunderstood that guy. Mr. Holmes, are you willing to enroll in our school? For McGonagall, she was already accustomed to the surprised expressions of young wizards and their guardians when they saw magic. The key was whether Sherlock could enroll on time. Judging from the fact that he replied to her letter, Sherlock himself should have no problems. Now it depended on what his parents thought. Noticing McGonagall's gaze, Mr. Holmes thought for a moment and asked, "Professor, does enrollment require boarding?" "Father, I don't think you would want me to live 800 kilometers away in Scotland and have to come home every day." "Scotland? Oh, dear Sherlock, that's too far away. That way, your mother and I won't be able to take care of you. I can take care of myself." "But... wait. Just a moment." The Holmes family looked at McGonagall in confusion. They saw her looking at Sherlock with an incredulous expression. "Mr. Holmes, did you just mention Scotland?" Sherlock calmly glanced at McGonagall. "Yes, Professor." How did you know?" McGonagall was shocked. Chapter 3. In this world, most magic schools are located in steep mountainous areas. Hogwarts is no exception. However, its exact geographical location is confidential. Even within the British wizarding world, not many people know it. Not to mention that all magic schools are under disillusionment charms, so non-magical people only see ruins or warning signs. Finding the school is almost impossible. Just 5 minutes ago, the Sherlock family didn't even know magic existed. But just now, Sherlock, a boy from a Muggle family, said something remarkable in a nonchalant tone. "Hogwarts is in Scotland. This is simply a stampede of Gorgons." McGonagall used great effort to not lose her composure. "Know what?" Compared to McGonagall, Sherlock seemed very calm. As if he didn't understand why she was so surprised. "What you just said, you mean Hogwarts is in Scotland?" McGonagall couldn't help but ask. "It's just a simple deduction." Seeing McGonagall still looking confused, Sherlock sighed and took out the admission letter he received 3 days ago. This kind of paper is thick, sturdy, and of very good quality, costing nearly £0.5 per stack. McGonagall looked at Sherlock in confusion, seeming to ask with her eyes, "So what?" Sherlock handed the letter to McGonagall. "Professor, please hold it up to the light." McGonagall was puzzled, but she did as Sherlock asked. Then she saw a capital A and 3 lowercase l, b, a intertwined in the paper's texture. McGonagall was stunned. Over the years, Hogwarts had sent countless admission letters, but this detail was the first time she had noticed it, and naturally, she didn't understand what it represented. "Do you know what this means?" she couldn't help but ask. "Of course, Alba means Scotland in Gaelic, and this paper is made in Scotland," Sherlock said in a matter-of-fact tone. "But..." Before McGonagall could refute, Sherlock explained very quickly. "Of course, this alone is not enough to judge, but adding the Scottish eagle owl that came to deliver the letter, the Scottish plaid pattern on your shirt, and the Scottish Gaelic you inadvertently used when speaking, if you still can't make a judgment with these, then it would be too foolish." Merlin's beard. After Sherlock finished speaking in one breath, McGonagall was completely shocked. It seemed incredible before, but after Sherlock's explanation, everything became so obvious. This little wizard is really too surprising. So, when she returns to school this time, should she consider suggesting that Headmaster Dumbledore strengthen the security measures? After all, deducing the location of Hogwarts without magic is too unbelievable. "Sherlock, are you really going to go there to school?" Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and head of Gryffindor House, had left. Professor McGonagall greatly admired Sherlock for deducing the location of Hogwarts based solely on the clues he observed. Although Sherlock himself thought it was obvious. Because of this, the always strict Professor McGonagall was generous with praise and expressed considerable expectations for Sherlock's upcoming life at Hogwarts. After this, McGonagall did not forget to earnestly fulfill her duties. She told Sherlock that things like wands, robes, and magic books, which seemed to exist only in the magical world, could actually be bought in London as long as you knew the way. In fact, she could have taken Sherlock to Diagon Alley herself. But as head of Gryffindor and deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, McGonagall was too busy, especially during the time leading up to the start of school. After discovering that Sherlock's family did not reject magic and that his parents promised to take Sherlock there themselves, she decided to free up her time for families who needed her more. So she explained very carefully, and also told Sherlock how to get to Hogwarts by train. In addition, McGonagall also signed a confidentiality agreement with Sherlock's parents on behalf of Hogwarts except for immediate family members. The existence of magic cannot be revealed to others. This was not a problem for the Holmes couple, as they were not flamboyant people to begin with. Sherlock thought of something, and his eyes became more profound. When McGonagall left, Mrs. Holmes, who was already sentimental, hesitated again. According to McGonagall, once Sherlock went to Hogwarts, he would have to live at the school and could only return home during Christmas and summer vacations each year. This alone was already difficult for Mrs. Holmes to accept. Not to mention that this kind of life would continue until Sherlock graduated from 7th grade. The thought of Sherlock only spending a little over 2 months by her side each year for the next 7 years was naturally unacceptable to her as a mother. Dear Valida, since it's Sherlock's own decision, we should support him. We always have, haven't we? I understand, but Tenon, Sherlock is only 11 years old. Trust me, and trust Sherlock, he will take care of himself. The reputation of wizards may not be good, but Sherlock's life safety is more important. The consequences caused by magic outbursts sounded too terrible. Besides, this was Sherlock's own choice. He was not an ordinary little boy after all. Mr. Holmes explained while putting his arm around his wife and walking towards the bedroom, while turning back to give Sherlock a reassuring look. Sherlock was of course relieved. Although his father would usually give in to his mother in most cases, he was always able to successfully persuade her at crucial moments. Sure enough, Mr. Holmes did not disappoint his son. After sufficient communication, he finally persuaded his wife to accept the reality that Sherlock would spend less time with them in the next 7 years. The next thing was to prepare for school. Originally, Sherlock planned to go and purchase all the necessary items for school on his own. But this time, Mrs. Holmes refused to allow him to act alone. In addition, shopping required financial support from the family, so this time the two men had no choice but to compromise. The next day, the family of 3 drove off and soon arrived at Charing Cross. This is a very prosperous area. It is located in the city of Westminster, which is adjacent to Sherlock's home in the Chelsea district, and is the traditional centre of London and the customary zero reference point for road and rail mileage in the UK. The Sherlock family's destination this time was on this street. According to McGonagall, they first needed to find the famous Leaky Cauldron. Of course, the famous McGonagall mentioned was limited to the magical world. Before she mentioned it, neither Sherlock nor the Holmes couple had ever heard of such a place. Originally, Sherlock didn't think this would be difficult, but he didn't expect them to encounter setbacks from the start. Tenon, are we mistaken? Mrs. Holmes looked at the bookstore on the left and then at the record store on the right. Because it was located in the centre of London, both stores were very popular. But she looked left and right, up and down, and couldn't find a bar anywhere. Mr. Holmes also frowned. Seeing the passing pedestrians going into the bookstore and the record store, but none of them looked like they were going to a bar. At this moment, the couple looked at their son in unison. Unlike his parents, Sherlock could see very clearly. There was indeed a bar here. Its location was between the large bookstore and the record store on the other side, just as McGonagall had said. But if McGonagall hadn't specifically pointed it out, even Sherlock's meticulous observation wouldn't have noticed it. As for others, including Mr. and Mrs. Holmes, it goes without saying. Judging from the hurried look of the passers-by, they couldn't see the Leaky Cauldron. Is this the influence of the magical world on the secular world, reducing its own existence so that ordinary people turn a blind eye? Sherlock understood in his heart. Sure enough, once you come into contact with the magical world, interesting things come one after another. He directly responded to his parents with action. Watching his son walk straight towards the position between the 2 stores, the couple quickly followed. When they got closer, they finally noticed the bar. Old, small, and dirty, this was the first impression the Leaky Cauldron gave. Walking inside the bar, it was still dimly lit and sparsely furnished. There were a few tables in the shadows of the corner, where a group of people were drinking and talking loudly. Everything looked no different from an ordinary bar. But these people were all dressed in strange clothes, and the topics of their conversations were extremely absurd. Mr. Holmes couldn't help but say to his wife after only hearing a few sentences, "Valita, I bet you that ordinary people would get up and leave before even finishing their mead here." Mrs. Holmes also nodded. After all, creating a meteor shower sounded absurd no matter how you listened to it. Sherlock's gaze swept over these people one by one, and each scene was subconsciously analyzed and organized by him. The smoking woman 5 meters to the northwest, under 50 years old, married, poor self-control, separated from her husband, came to the bar to look for young men. The man smiling foolishly 7 meters in front, in his early 20s, about to get married, came here to say goodbye to his single life. His friends don't support his actions. The dwarf next to the wine table in the back corner, around 35 years old, irritable, doesn't have enough money to pay for his drinks, currently trying to find a way to skip out on the bill. The average-looking strong man passing by. Each person observed by Sherlock seemed to automatically send this information into his field of vision, and for Sherlock, this had become an instinct like eating and drinking. The man walking towards us, about 40 years old, has been observing everyone entering and leaving the bar. Oh, he's the owner. 2 muggles, 1 little wizard, a classic combination. Another summer blown by the wind is here. The man stopped in front of the 3 and directly introduced himself. "I'm the bar owner, Tom Cruise. You can call me Old Tom. Welcome to the Leaky Cauldron." Tom Cruise? Looking at his almost completely bald head, his wrinkled face like a shriveled walnut, and his eyes that were almost squinted into a line, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes twitched at the corners of their mouths, not knowing what to say for a moment. They knew it wasn't polite, but they couldn't control themselves. However, Sherlock was not affected, and he went straight up to greet him. "Mr. Cruise, Professor McGonagall sent us." After judging Tom's character through observation, Sherlock directly stated McGonagall's name. Of course, a little wizard from a Muggle family, rare but not uncommon, come with me." While following Tom, Sherlock indirectly inquired about the people he had just observed. As the bar owner, Tom naturally knew their situation. The result was very gratifying to Sherlock. His deductions were all correct. It seemed that even after coming to the magical world, the deductive method he had summarized from the scientific system had not lost its effect. So, when science and magic intersect, the story begins. Chapter 4. The ability to see through appearances and discover the truth from subtle details is undoubtedly a talent. But it also needs to be forged through constant practice. Initially, Sherlock started with relatively simple problems. For example, when encountering a stranger, he would observe and identify their history and occupation. Such exercises may seem childish and boring, but they can sharpen a person's observational skills. As time passed and with continuous practice, Sherlock became increasingly skilled in this area. Now he already knew where to look and what to observe. He had summarized his own method of deduction. Although not yet perfect, observation and analysis had become second nature to him. If he were in a train carriage, he could even identify the occupations of his fellow passengers through observation. Unfortunately, no one would bet with him, otherwise, he would definitely make a fortune. While Sherlock was questioning the bar owner Tom, the latter led Sherlock and his parents through the bar to a small courtyard surrounded by walls. Sherlock's eyes quickly scanned the surroundings and found nothing but a trash can and some weeds. So, the problem lies with the trash can? Sherlock took 2 steps forward and approached it. At the same time, Tom also made a move. He slowly drew his wand, and just as he was about to do something, he turned back to Sherlock with a smile, reminding him. "Once you have a wand, you'll need to come in by yourselves. Remember the position of this brick, it's on the trash cans. 3rd brick up, 2nd brick across," Sherlock said calmly. Tom turned back to look at Sherlock, and asked with a look of surprise, how did you know?" "Because it was different from the other bricks on the wall, both in color and the degree of wear and tear around it." For someone skilled in observation, discovering this was not difficult. What an amazing ability of observation! Hearing Sherlock's explanation, Tom couldn't help but express his sincere praise, and then tapped the brick lightly 3 times with his wand. Sherlock's family stared at the wall brick without blinking. Next, something astonishing happened. The tapped brick began to shake. First, a small hole appeared in the middle. Then the bricks on both sides moved quickly, and the hole became larger and larger. Finally, a wide archway appeared in front of them. The archway led to a winding, cobblestone street with no end in sight. Compared to the original dark and cramped leaky cauldron, this avenue seemed particularly bright. It could be said that the view suddenly opened up. "Welcome to Diagon Alley." At this moment, Tom's voice rang out just right. This was their destination, Diagon Alley, also known as Diagon Road. Sherlock turned around and saw the archway narrowing, the walls returning to their original appearance, and Tom waving goodbye to them. "That dwarf, he has no money, he should be preparing to run away now." Sherlock thought for a moment and decided to offer a reminder. Hearing his words, Tom's face suddenly changed, as if he remembered something, and he rushed back without even thanking them. Then they heard faint sounds from inside the bar, such as "Stop, you stop, and catch him." Sherlock shrugged, retracted his gaze, and walked onto the street with his parents. Diagon Alley was in stark contrast to the leaky cauldron. Bright and wide streets, bustling and crowded shops, and a lively crowd. Even the knowledgeable Mr. Holmes couldn't help but say, "It's hard to imagine that London would have such a place." Mrs. Holmes nodded, agreeing with her husband's opinion. Sherlock, however, fell into thought. Since confirming that the existence of magic was not fake news, the magical world had become increasingly attractive to him. Now it seemed that the existence of places like the Leaky Cauldron and Diagon Alley was somewhat similar to the outer and inner worlds in science fiction works. However, the magical world should not exist apart from the secular world. Presumably, even if the city government doesn't know, the Prime Minister and the royal family should be aware. Just the existence of such a place would definitely result in the city government collecting less tax. Sherlock said secretly in his heart. According to McGonagall's reminder, the three first went to Gringotts Wizarding Bank on the north side of Diagon Alley. They needed to exchange some magical currency. Yes, although somewhat unexpected, the magical world really had its own monetary system. Gold coins were galleons, 17 silver sickles made 1 galleon, and 29 bronze nuts made 1 sickle. This exchange rate inevitably made Sherlock somewhat despise the wizard's mathematical abilities. Even if they couldn't arrange it in decimal, at least they should keep the exchange rate between the three currencies consistent, right? Although the United Kingdom used to have an old system of £1 equaling 20 shillings and 1 shilling equaling 12 pence, since the currency reform in 1971 abolished shillings, it had long since become £1 equaling 100 new pence. The secular world was constantly progressing, so why couldn't the magical world keep up? Regretful as it was, money still had to be exchanged. Compared to other buildings in Diagon Alley, Gringotts Wizarding Bank was very distinctive. The tall, towering white building made it stand out from the surrounding low buildings, and the bronze doors shimmered in the sunlight. However, the most attractive thing was the guy standing at the door wearing a scarlet gold-trimmed uniform. Short stature, long hands and feet, black face, long and pointed beard, that was Goblin. Seeing this scene, Sherlock's eyes lit up, another creature that existed in legends. "Are you here to exchange money? Don't wander around, come with me." Probably recognizing the Holmes couple's non-wizard status, the Goblin immediately guessed the trio's intentions, bowed to them, and said. Sherlock noticed that the other party's attitude was distant and the tone was quite cold. Tisk, the service industry still has this attitude, the magical world really should train them properly. Holmes' parents didn't have the mind to consider this, and Mrs. Holmes seemed a little worried. "Tenon, I wonder if the money we brought is enough? Sherlock seems to want to buy a lot of things, I don't want him to suffer so far away." "Dear Valida, don't worry, trust me, it'll be fine." Mr. Holmes comforted her softly. The Holmes family had a solid foundation. Sherlock's grandfather was a generational country squire, which in the Victorian era was a proper aristocrat. Even in today's London, they belonged to the top of the middle class. So as long as the currency value of the magical world wasn't too outrageous, Mr. Holmes was confident in his family's purchasing power. When following the Goblin into the second silver door, the words engraved on the two doors caught Sherlock's attention. Chapter 5. Enter, stranger, but be warned. What will be the fate of the insatiable greedy? Those who only take and never give will surely face the harshest punishment. So if you seek to take from our underground vaults a treasure that never belonged to you, thief, you have been warned. Beware of attracting not treasure, but retribution. Sherlock turned his gaze away from these lines. It was clear that this wizarding bank was very confident in its security measures. How should he put it? Every bank thinks that way, until something unexpected happens. Sherlock pondered while observing the tall marble hall before him. After only a moment's consideration, he had already discovered several loopholes. If magic didn't exist, and he had one night, he could definitely get this bank on the news. Shocking! Bank's money vanishes, mysterious figure bypasses security and leaves calmly. This wasn't a rare occurrence. For example, there was the financial bond theft in London a year ago. The Bank of England's response at the time was classic. Phase 1, claim nothing happened. Phase 2, say maybe something happened, but we shouldn't take action. Phase 3, say maybe we should take action, but we can't do anything. Phase 4, maybe we could have done something, but now it's too late. The Wizarding Bank could completely learn from this. However, Sherlock now knew that magic existed in this world. Before fully understanding this unfamiliar concept, it was best not to act rashly. Upon arriving at the counter, an idle goblin was brought over by the goblin who had led them, to handle the exchange business for the three of them. The exchange rate between galleons and pounds wasn't fixed, today it was 1:5. This was somewhat surprising. It should be noted that it was 1991, and the pound was still very strong. In this situation, the value of a galleon was actually 5 times that of a pound, which was really impressive. Fortunately, Mrs. Holmes's concerns didn't come to pass. Because they brought enough money. Enough to exchange for nearly 1,000 galleons. However, an accident occurred just as they were about to exchange. There was actually a limit to how many pounds could be exchanged for magical world currency. Sherlock was initially surprised upon hearing the news, but he quickly understood. In the non-magical world, there are also limits on the amount of domestic currency that can be exchanged for foreign currency. This is mainly to prevent excessive capital flow. Excessive capital flow, especially a large influx of short-term capital, can trigger violent fluctuations in the financial market. Especially in some specific economic situations, such as economic downturns or increased financial market volatility, without the constraints of foreign exchange management, it can lead to large-scale capital flight. This can then lead to currency devaluation, financial market chaos, and a series of other problems, and in more serious cases, it may even trigger a financial crisis. Therefore, for reasons such as maintaining foreign exchange reserves, protecting the domestic economy, and maintaining financial market order, countries have limits on the amount of foreign currency that ordinary citizens can exchange each year. Once this limit is exceeded, no more foreign currency can be exchanged that year. Since the magical world has its own independent currency system, it's reasonable to have a limit on the exchange of magical currency. Bullshit. It would be understandable if everyone was restricted. But according to the goblin, non-wizarding families can only exchange a maximum of 128 galleons per year. As for the limit for pure wizarding families, the goblin didn't say, but Sherlock knew just by observing that this amount was far above 128 galleons. He could even boldly assume that there was no limit to the amount of galleons that wizarding families could exchange. What else could he say? It's just that set of discriminatory practices. However, with his keen observation, Sherlock still discovered other paths on the other party's business form. The 128 galleon limit seemed to only apply to pounds. So he asked another question. Sure enough, Gringotts was also buying gold, jewelry, antiques, etc. In other words, although you can only exchange 128 galleons with pounds, you can still exchange valuables such as gold. Sherlock's eyes lit up immediately. He suddenly realized that he had found a brand new path for those criminals in London to dispose of stolen goods. Gringotts, a haven for money laundering. The premise is that they can come here. Although the goblin who was being questioned looked impatient, under Sherlock's questioning, the other party still provided a message. 128 galleons is more than enough to buy all the items needed for a new wizard to go to school. After all, besides these things, going to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is purely compulsory education, with free room and board, and no fees are required. This was consistent with the non-magical world. In the UK, students begin compulsory education at the age of 5 when they enter kindergarten, and continue until they finish secondary education at the age of 17. At this stage, children of the appropriate age must attend school, and all parents must send their children to school. Students will enjoy completely free national benefits, with the state responsible for the necessary tuition, books, and necessary supplies. 11 years old is the stage to end primary school and enter secondary education. So, Apart from this shopping expense before the start of school each year, in theory, no additional expenses are required. In the end, after paying £640 to exchange for the maximum amount of galleons, Sherlock and his parents left Gringotts. For a long time after leaving Gringotts, Mrs. Holmes seemed a little unhappy. She was deeply influenced by the idea of better to be rich on the road than poor at home, and had even begun to consider whether to go home first and bring the gold goods here to exchange for galleons, to save her son from suffering in distant Scotland. Sherlock stopped her from doing this in time. "Let's go shopping first, and if the money is really not enough, then use this method." Mrs. Holmes agreed to Sherlock's suggestion. Next was the stage of buying. According to the admission list, Sherlock bought a lot of textbooks, as well as cauldrons, balances, telescopes and other items for magic courses. At this time, Sherlock found that the Gringotts goblins' words were somewhat exaggerated. 128 galleons to buy the items on the admission list can only be said to be just enough, definitely not more than enough. Judging from the prices of the items he had already purchased, 3 plain work robes cost 20 galleons, a telescope cost 10 galleons, and a quill for writing also cost 1 galleon. The most outrageous thing was that a brand new textbook actually cost 9 galleons. Is knowledge in the magical world so expensive? This made the already unhappy Mrs. Holmes even more uncomfortable. Because of this, she also firmly rejected Sherlock's idea of buying second-hand textbooks. Sherlock couldn't help but feel a little helpless about this. He was a typical pragmatist. In his opinion, there was actually no difference between second-hand textbooks and new textbooks, but the price was 1/3 of the latter. This was simply a great deal, okay? If he were in charge, he would definitely choose second-hand textbooks. Unfortunately, his mother didn't agree. In addition to the specified book list, Sherlock also bought a few extra books, such as Important Magical Events of the 20th Century and The Rise and Fall of Dark Magic, which could help him further understand the magical world. There was also a best-selling work by an author named Bear Grylls, The Ultimate Survival Guide. Chapter 6. The Ultimate Survival Handbook by Bear Grylls. Centering around the principle of better safe than sorry, this book uses the author's real-life knowledge and experiences to show readers how to properly respond when encountering danger in the magical world. Sherlock was particularly interested in the book's Wilderness Survival Guide, as well as the author's personal experiences facing dangerous creatures such as trolls, long-tailed crocodiles, vampires, and voles alone. After skimming through it, Sherlock decisively bought it. At the end of the essential list, there is also a special reminder. First-year students are not allowed to bring their own flying broomsticks. This special reminder naturally caught Sherlock's attention early on. Sherlock is not a person who follows rules blindly. He never minds breaking rules if necessary. As for flying broomsticks, it's hard to say whether it's necessary to carry one, but at least he needs to figure out what this thing is. In the Quality Quidditch Supplies shop, also located on the north side of Diagon Alley, Sherlock finally saw it. As the name suggests, a flying broomstick is a broom that can fly in the sky. In the magical world, it is the most commonly used means of transportation for wizards, and it is also widely used in various sports competitions. For this novel gadget, Sherlock, who has always been curious about the unknown, naturally plunged into it. However, after observing it for a while, he found that their prices were staggering. The price of an entry-level flying broomstick starts at 100 or 200 galleons, which has reached the annual currency exchange limit for non-wizarding families. High-quality flying broomsticks, such as the Nimbus 2000 and the Clean Sweep 7, 2 first-tier brands, cost more than 1,000 galleons each. According to the shop owner, the biggest use of flying broomsticks for people going to magic school, besides flying, is to participate in Quidditch matches. That is a sport similar to soccer. The main difference from the former is that the venue is moved from the ground to the air, and there are some additional rules. It can be said that in the magical world, everyone loves Quidditch. However, for various reasons, Sherlock ultimately rejected the enthusiastic boss even though he claimed to be able to provide a way for first-year students to sneak flying broomsticks into the school. In addition, he once again persuaded his mother to choose a pewter cauldron. Mrs. Holmes originally wanted to buy a pure gold one. In addition to not being allowed to bring flying broomsticks, the admission list also reminds freshmen that they can bring an owl, toad, or cat. According to the pet store owner, toads were once all the rage many years ago. Because although it has no magical abilities itself, it is a high-quality object for practicing spells and testing potions. Especially for pharmacists, its skin can attract liquids, which makes testing those potions that need to be taken orally more convenient and faster. It's a pity that times have changed. Toads are no longer popular. Cats are also not good. In addition to catching mice, they are also prone to causing allergic symptoms. So owls are the best choice. However, in Sherlock's view, it is simply because an owl costs 15 galleons, which is much more expensive than the average price of 10 galleons for pet cats and single-digit galleons for toads. But Sherlock still chose an owl. Just the fact that it can send letters and packages makes it worth the money. This time, the three members of the Sherlock family rarely reached a consensus. Next up was the part of the trip that Sherlock was most interested in. Buying a wand. There is only one wand shop in the entire Diagon Alley, located on the south side of Diagon Alley. Compared to other shops in Diagon Alley, this shop looks small and dilapidated. A wand is displayed on a purple cushion in the window, and the gold lettering on the door has peeled off, reading Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. Perhaps not redecorating is intentional to reflect the time point of 382 BC. Sherlock immediately thought. As he stepped into the shop, a tinkling bell rang. Sherlock's eyes quickly scanned the shop. The space here is not large, and there is no furniture except for a long chair in the corner. Thousands of narrow cardboard boxes containing wands are piled from the floor to the ceiling, with a thin layer of dust everywhere. Just then, a soft voice sounded, "Welcome." Speaking was a short old man, his pair of silvery white eyes like two bright moons in the dim shop. Smart, confident, lonely, compassionate, around 55 years old, just finished serving another customer. At the first glance of Ollivander, Sherlock immediately came to this conclusion. At the same time, Ollivander smiled and said to Sherlock and his parents, "Looks like a Muggle-born wizard." Sherlock raised his eyebrows upon hearing this. This is the second time he has heard the word Muggle today. The first time was from Tom, the owner of the Leaky Cauldron. From the context analysis, this should refer to ordinary people from non-wizarding families, but which arm do you use to wield a wand? Ollivander's words interrupted Sherlock's thoughts. Right hand, Sherlock paused, and added, the left hand is also fine if necessary. Ollivander looked at Sherlock with some surprise. He has been running this shop for so many years, and he has never heard such an answer. After being stunned for a moment, he still gave priority to Sherlock extending his right arm and began to measure his size. From shoulder to fingertip, from wrist to elbow, from knee to armpit, meticulously. In this process, Sherlock was surprised to find that it was the tape measure that was operating automatically. But thinking that this is a magical world, he quickly relieved himself. If it can't be explained, magic fills in. This scene was just surprising to Sherlock, but it was exciting for Mrs. Holmes. This tool is simply amazing. She must ask this gentleman later. With it, it will be much more convenient to make clothes for her husband and children. After measuring the size, it was time to choose a wand. Sherlock originally thought this was a very simple matter. Unexpectedly, the time spent next was even longer than when his mother usually went shopping. 9 inches, made of willow, makes a whooshing sound when waved. It is a good wand for casting spells. Come, wave it and try. Sherlock took the wand. But before he had time to wave it, Ollivander snatched it away. Sherlock! What does this mean? Try this one, mahogany, 10¼ inches, more flexible. Before Sherlock could ask, the other party had already stuffed him with a new wand. This time Sherlock did try to wave it, but there was no reaction. Again, unicorn hair, ebony core, good elasticity, 9¾ inches. Something flew off the shelf next door, obviously not suitable either. Ashwood, phoenix feather, 7½ inches. Black walnut and dragon nerve, 8 inches. Time, just passed slowly and imperceptibly. Chapter 7. Ollivander's Wand Shop. Sherlock tried wand after wand, but none seemed right for him. Faced with this situation, Ollivander showed no impatience whatsoever. On the contrary, he became increasingly excited. Sherlock said nothing, merely passively cooperating with the shopkeeper's selection, appearing very patient. Mr. and Mrs. Holmes exchanged glances. Mainly, they didn't understand what kind of wand Ollivander thought would be most suitable. In their eyes, Sherlock had barely taken the wand, let alone waved it or even raised it, before the eccentric old man snatched it away. This had happened several times already. Finally, Mrs. Holmes couldn't help but speak, suggesting softly to her husband, "Tanner, perhaps we should look elsewhere." Mr. Holmes hesitated, "But I heard this is the only place." "Hey!" Unexpectedly, Ollivander's hearing was exceptionally keen. Although his attention had been focused on Sherlock, he now looked up. "Is this lady questioning the Ollivander family?" Being stared at by his sharp gaze, Mrs. Holmes couldn't help but feel a little nervous. "No, I just..." "No need to trouble yourselves. The Ollivander family has been making wands since 382 BC. No matter how picky the customer, they can always find the right one here. Including the one who left earlier." Sherlock interjected suddenly. Ollivander paused for a moment, then chuckled, "What a perceptive young wizard. Yes, there was a picky customer before, a very famous figure, ha." Saying this, Ollivander seemed to realize something and changed his tone. "It's not so much the wizard choosing the wand, but the wand choosing its wizard. Remember, no one leaves Ollivanders disappointed, that's right." With that, he slapped his forehead, walked to the shelf where the wands had been flying from, and took out a plain-looking black wand from the corner. "Beechwood and a dragon heartstring core, 12 inches, resilient and flexible, give it a try." Sherlock naturally noticed Ollivander changing the subject. He didn't ask further but took the wand as instructed. The moment he held the wand, he felt a jolt. A mysterious sensation suddenly arose, as if something had connected him to the wand in his hand. He waved it gently, and a white smoke ring appeared, drifting slowly outwards. Not only that, but he seemed to hear the sound of a steam whistle and the laughter of sailors. It was as if he and the wand were resonating. How wonderful! Even without understanding magic, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes could tell that this was a wand suitable for Sherlock. "Did this wand choose me?" Sherlock asked as Ollivander handed him the wand in its box. "Yes, the wand chooses the wizard. That's the standard answer." Finally, having chosen a wand for Sherlock, this picky customer, Ollivander seemed very pleased and explained further. "For those who truly match a beechwood wand, if they are adults, they are certainly understanding and experienced. If they are teenagers..." Ollivander looked at Sherlock, revealing a meaningful expression, "Then it means they possess wisdom beyond their years." Wisdom beyond his years? Sherlock mused. At this moment, Mrs. Holmes also stepped forward, inquiring about the self-measuring tape. But she received the answer that it could not be used by non-wizards. This couldn't help but make her feel a little regretful. After paying 8 galleons, Mr. Ollivander bowed and saw them out of the shop. "Meeting 2 picky customers in one day, it seems Hogwarts will be very lively this year," he murmured to himself, watching the family of 3 walk away. After purchasing the wand, Sherlock and his parents finally concluded their shopping trip in Diagon Alley. By spending frugally, the items on the school list cost nearly 80 galleons in total. With the addition of a few extra books, Sherlock had less than 20 galleons left. Mrs. Holmes felt that limiting the exchange of magical currency was discrimination by the magical world against non-wizarding families, and she resented it for a while. However, after Mr. Holmes's persuasion, she finally gave up the idea of complaining, and the family smoothly returned from Diagon Alley to the Leaky Cauldron. Just as they were about to drive back, Sherlock paused. He noticed a couple with a little girl, hesitating between the bookstore and the record shop. With just one glance, Sherlock judged that it was a couple with their daughter, and their purpose was the same as theirs not long ago. Sherlock's actions caught the attention of Mr. and Mrs. Holmes. Following his gaze, they naturally saw the family of 3 lingering between the bookstore and the record shop. The couple were well dressed and refined. The little girl had thick brown hair and was chattering away. Although they didn't have Sherlock's observational and analytical skills, it wasn't difficult to guess that they were also looking for the Leaky Cauldron. Mrs. Holmes was a warm-hearted person. Thinking of her family's recent experience, she immediately pulled her husband and walked over. She was obviously planning to offer help. Sherlock knew that with that little wizard, this family would definitely be able to find the Leaky Cauldron eventually. But he didn't expect that just because of a glance in the crowd, his mother would take the initiative to get involved. Seeing that his parents had already started talking to the family, he could only join them. "I knew it. You're also looking for Diagon Alley, right?" Today's experience filled Mrs. Holmes with confidence, and she quickly took the initiative in the conversation with a "been there, done that" attitude. "Oh, I bet the goblins at the bank were just awful, like Aunt Susan's apple pie next door. Good heavens, they only gave us an exchange limit of 128 galleons. It's so stupid to not want to make money." If I ever see them again, I swear I'll kick them hard in the butt with my boots." Mrs. Holmes's words quickly closed the distance. After the two sides introduced themselves and learned that the Grangers, as they were called, were also not wizards, she excitedly pulled Sherlock in front of her. "Sherlock, this is Miss Hermione Granger, also a Hogwarts freshman. You can take care of each other when the time comes." Chapter 8. Mrs. Holmes was indeed happy to help. But this was just one of the reasons she was so keen on assisting the Grangers. As a mother, she knew her son's personality all too well. Solitary, peculiar, and unsociable. At his previous school, she had been plagued by this issue. Although Sherlock had resolved the problem himself, the final outcome was far from pleasant. So, if he could make friends before even starting school, it would be ideal. Meanwhile, Sherlock had already greeted the little girl named Hermione. Out of politeness, he also said to Mr. Granger, "Dr. Granger, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Pleased to." "Wait, how did you know I'm a doctor?" Mr. Granger subconsciously agreed, but suddenly realized something was off. He hadn't mentioned his profession during the introduction. Mrs. Granger and Hermione, with her bushy brown hair, were also taken aback. Seeing the Grangers' surprised expressions, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes exchanged smiles. Of course, they weren't surprised at all. After all, similar things had happened many times before. However, Mrs. Holmes's smile quickly faded. Because Sherlock didn't directly answer Mr. Granger, but turned to Mrs. Granger again. "Mrs. Granger, I suspect my mother has pulpitis caused by tooth decay, but she's afraid of pain and doesn't dare go to the hospital. I hope you can help her." Mrs. Granger's eyes lit up, and she immediately began asking about Mrs. Holmes's symptoms. Mrs. Holmes glared at Sherlock, but still cooperated and began describing her condition to Mrs. Granger. From the moment Sherlock was brought forward, Hermione Granger had begun observing him. Sherlock had short black hair, grey eyes, and was taller than his peers, enough to attract attention at first glance. Hearing him directly state his parents' professions now, she was even more surprised and couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. That's when she noticed his rather slender, hooked nose. So big. When Sherlock's sharp gaze turned towards her, Hermione, caught in the act, couldn't help but blush and quickly turned her head away. The Grangers had arrived somewhat late after all. Although the two mothers got along very well, the Grangers had to leave first to buy Hermione's school supplies as soon as possible. However, before parting ways, Mrs. Holmes not only showed them the location of the leaky cauldron but also shared her shopping experiences from today with Mrs. Granger without reservation. At the same time, Mrs. Granger also persuaded Mrs. Holmes to have a comprehensive periodontal health checkup before the official start of school. The kind that wouldn't hurt. Thus, the day in Diagon Alley came to a satisfactory end. The following month was very fulfilling for Sherlock. He didn't dwell on the Granger family. His mother's pulpitis was indeed an unexpected bonus. As for taking care of each other with Hermione at school, that was unnecessary. Sherlock had always considered taking care of himself a troublesome matter. And as for Hermione taking care of him, that was even more impossible. Besides, with a little witch in tow, where would he find the time to explore Hogwarts? During this time, he carefully studied how to use his new pet. After a few tries, he discovered that, just as the pet store owner had said, owls could send letters and packages. They seemed no different from postmen, but their speed and accuracy were much better. He also gave his pet owl a name. Watson. Sherlock couldn't say why, but he just felt that this name was suitable for a long-term companion. In addition, he also read all the textbooks and several other books he had purchased. Through them, Sherlock finally had a systematic and macro understanding of the wizarding world. Compared to Hermione Granger, the little witch, he was more interested in two other names. One of them was Harry James Potter. Whether it was a history of magic from the school's required reading list, or important magical events of the 20th century and the rise and fall of the dark arts that Sherlock had purchased himself, all of them mentioned this name. This little boy, the same age as him, was born on July 31, 1980. He was called the Boy Who Lived, the savior of the wizarding world, and the only nemesis of the Dark Lord. As for why Harry Potter had these titles, it was due to another name associated with him. That was the Dark Lord who was thwarted by Harry Potter. According to the books, this was the most powerful and dangerous dark wizard in history. To the point that when it was necessary to mention his name, many books directly referred to him as he who must not be named. Only a very few books would mention the name Voldemort, and even then, it would often only appear once. When it was necessary to mention him again later, it would become the Dark Lord or you-know-who. Sherlock, a firm believer in science, found it somewhat incomprehensible. This was truly a bit too outrageous. Perhaps, this was the characteristic of the wizarding world? In any case, because Voldemort was powerful and had many followers, he once ruled the wizarding world. For the entire wizarding world, it was the darkest period in history. However, where there is oppression, there is resistance. The dark and oppressive rule aroused increasing dissatisfaction, and finally, a protracted war broke out between good and evil. The person who led the White Wizards in the great battle against Voldemort was none other than Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This is also the reason why Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and Dumbledore himself have such a high status in the magical world. This war was called the Wizarding War, and it lasted for a full 11 years. The entire wizarding world suffered greatly in this war. According to the books, if this war had continued, Voldemort might have truly ruled the wizarding world. However, just as the Wizarding War entered its 11th year, when Voldemort's power was at its peak, a turning point appeared. October 31, 1981, Halloween Eve. For some unknown reason, the terrifying Dark Lord came to Godric's Hollow. It was a small village in southwestern England, a semi-wizard settlement named after the famous wizard Godric Gryffindor. Harry Potter and his parents lived here. Undoubtedly, the Potters were an excellent pair of wizards. They were powerful and had once been active on the front lines against Voldemort. Even so, when confronting Voldemort head-on, the Potters were still mercilessly killed by him without any suspense. After killing the Potters, Voldemort pointed his wand at the only 15-month-old Harry Potter. But the Dark Lord, who possessed immense power, had personally killed hundreds of people, and terrified the entire wizarding world, actually missed. The powerful magic that had always been invincible had blasted the Potter's house into ruins, but Harry himself was unscathed. In this way, Harry Potter became the only person to date who had survived under Voldemort's hand. Chapter 9. The mysterious figure, the Dark Lord Voldemort, had vanished. All that remained was Harry Potter, and a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. To this day, no one knows the reason why. Regardless, it's an undeniable fact that the Dark Lord, who dominated the magical world, was defeated by an infant. With this, the 11-year-long Wizarding War came to an end, and the Wizarding world was finally free from darkness and terror. Because of this, Harry Potter became a household name and a hero before he even grew up, revered as the boy who lived. Some even suggested making the day Voldemort disappeared Harry Potter Day. Of course, this request was ultimately not fulfilled. But this did not affect Harry Potter's special status in the magical world. According to the rules of the magical world, Harry Potter, the same age as Sherlock, would also be entering Hogwarts this summer of 1991. Undoubtedly, compared to Hermione Granger, Harry Potter's appeal to Sherlock was much higher. So, after learning about this history through books, Sherlock made a decision. Quickly approach Harry Potter after the start of school, and use this important figure as a breakthrough to understand the magical world. Sherlock had no doubt that if the world he was in was a novel, then Harry Potter, even if he wasn't the protagonist, would definitely be a very important clue figure. As long as he was with him, all kinds of conflicts would definitely come to his door. That way, understanding the entire magical world would become much easier. Furthermore, compared to adults like Albus Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall, it would undoubtedly be easier to open a breakthrough from Harry. Of course, this is relative. After all, with Harry Potter's household name recognition in the magical world, he should be a popular figure at school. Maybe there will be a group of little fans running around for him, so it won't be easy to approach him then. But the more it is like this, the more challenging it is. Finally, the time came to September 1st. On this day, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes sent Sherlock to King's Cross Station together. Hogwarts is in the Scottish Highlands, this was Sherlock's deduction, and it was affirmed by Professor McGonagall. But to travel by train, how should I put it? To use Mr. Holmes's joke to evaluate, it would be is taking a train to a wizarding school a bit ridiculous? Have they run out of magic carpets? What the couple couldn't understand even more was that the train ticket showed that Sherlock was to take the train leaving from platform 9 3/4 at 11 o'clock. As everyone knows, London's King's Cross station only has platform 9 and platform 10, and there has never been a platform 9 3/4. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was a responsible faculty member. While carefully telling Sherlock how to enter Diagon Alley, she also told him how to find this seemingly non-existent platform 9 3/4. 10 o'clock, King's Cross Station. A platform was hung with a large plastic sign with the number 9, and another platform was hung with a large plastic sign with the number 10. Naturally, there was nothing in between. But Sherlock knew that platform 9 3/4 was behind the wall between the two, and some special means were needed to enter. The moment of parting had arrived. Mr. Holmes smiled and waved to his son. Mrs. Holmes turned away, her shoulders shaking constantly, obviously not wanting to face this moment of parting. As a sentimental person, her performance was not surprising. Mr. Holmes fully demonstrated the responsibility of the head of the family. After waving goodbye to Sherlock again, he hugged his wife's shoulders tightly and left. Sherlock, who watched his parents leave, was not in a hurry to crash into the wall. He first curiously stretched out his hand and touched it. It was solid to the touch, not a false illusion. He also knocked on the wall brick, and the sound of dong 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 came, proving that it was not hollow either. Looking down, obvious footprints and trolley marks went straight into the other end of the wall. Judging from the distance between the footsteps, these people were very forceful and hurried. A smile appeared on the corner of Sherlock's mouth. Now it seems that even without McGonagall's instructions, he knew how to enter. Sherlock guessed that the wizards probably deliberately added this setting that can only be entered by quickly crashing into the wall in order to prevent non-wizards from accidentally entering in the event of slight contact. There's nothing to say next. Facing the wall, speed up, crash. Sherlock didn't close his eyes, but still felt the darkness coming. But this only lasted for a moment. Soon, the view in front of him suddenly opened up. Directly in front was an empty railroad track and a platform crowded with passengers. Looking back, the place that was originally a partition wall had become a wrought iron archway, with a large sign that read Platform 9 3/4. Interesting. Sherlock showed a sincere smile. Originally, he thought the owl letter incident was a prank. Unexpectedly, it was the key to opening the door to a new world for him. Sherlock was sure that from this Platform 9 3/4, he would not be bored for a long time to come. Because he arrived a little early, the Hogwarts train had not yet arrived. Sherlock could only wait on this long platform. While waiting, he was not idle, but observed the wizards who were about to become his classmates one by one, analyzing their history and past. In this way, the long waiting time was not boring. New student, the mother is a witch, and the father is an ordinary person engaged in the demolition industry, who only learned about his wife's identity after marriage. Old student, eager to express himself, outgoing, strong expressive ability, usually serves as a host. New student, parents are not around for unknown reasons, raised by grandmother, forgetful, timid, lacking self-confidence. Just as Sherlock's gaze moved away from a round-faced little boy and his grandmother, and began to look for the next target. A crimson steam locomotive roared in, and the sign on the train read, Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. As soon as the train arrived, everyone rushed up. The thick smoke from the steam locomotive parked on the platform swirled over the crowd. Soon, the first car was filled with students, followed by the second and third. The students who boarded the train either leaned out of the windows to talk to their families, or played around in their seats, or sat in place with curious expressions looking around, and the surroundings were full of cheerful air. Sherlock was not in a hurry to check in and board the train. The target figure had not yet appeared, and before that, he would still wait. Even if the wait was very long. Finally, when he saw a thin little boy pushing a heavy suitcase alone on the platform, Sherlock showed a satisfied look. Finally waited for you. Chapter 10. Harry Potter was helpless. His usually strict Uncle Vernon had, for once, driven him to King's Cross Station and even helped him push his heavy trunk into the station. Harry had been wondering why Vernon had suddenly become so nice, but when he saw that there was no platform 9 3/4, he immediately understood. No wonder Vernon ran so fast, he was deliberately abandoning him here. Helpless, he had no choice but to bravely ask a guard. Although he didn't mention platform 9 3/4, he was still reprimanded as a troublemaker. Mainly because Harry couldn't even clearly explain where Hogwarts was located. When he learned that there wasn't a single train leaving at 11 o'clock, he felt utterly helpless. Fortunately, he encountered a kind wizarding family. With their help, Harry finally managed to reach platform 9 3/4. However, because he arrived so late, the train was almost full. Harry could only struggle through the crowd and find an empty compartment near the end of the train. He tried to lift his trunk onto the step, but because he was thin and the trunk was too heavy, he tried twice, and the trunk slammed heavily on his foot both times. He couldn't care less about the pain in his foot. He took a deep breath and tried a third time with all his might. Unsurprisingly, he failed again. At the critical moment, a strong hand steadily caught the trunk, preventing it from hitting Harry's foot for the third time. Harry looked up, and a face that was immediately impressive appeared in his sight. "You need help." The other party lifted the trunk onto the step with a little effort, while giving Harry a smile. Harry had grown up in an environment of bullying and oppression, both at home and at school. At home, he didn't even have his own room. His aunt and uncle had always made him live in the cupboard under the stairs, which was full of spiders. Whenever he caused any trouble, he would be punished by not being allowed to eat, and he was often bullied by his cousin Dudley. At school, Harry didn't have any friends either. This was also because of Dudley. As the school bully, Dudley was extremely tyrannical. He was the only one who dared to pull down his pants in public, and he was the only one who had others pull up his pants after he peed. Since everyone knew that Dudley hated Harry the most, no one wanted to go against Dudley's gang. In this environment, Harry naturally developed a withdrawn personality. However, at this moment, Harry would bet that the little boy's smile standing in front of him was the most charming smile he had ever seen in his life. Whether it was his distinctive grey eyes, his slender hooked nose, or the ease with which he solved the problem of the trunk, all made him look particularly reliable. The last time he had this feeling was on his birthday. The giant Hagrid brought him a letter of recommendation from Hogwarts and told Harry that he was a wizard. "I'm Sherlock Holmes, a first-year student, and you?" While Harry was still in a daze, Sherlock had already extended his hand to him. "Why you, hello, Holmes, I'm Harry Potter, also a first year." Harry was so nervous that he directly extended both hands when facing Sherlock. But he quickly realized that this was really stupid, and quickly withdrew one hand. Mainly because he really didn't have much social experience, and he was afraid that the other party would laugh at him. Sherlock naturally wouldn't do that. Even for Sherlock, finding Harry Potter, whom he had never met before, on an entire train was not an easy task. Fortunately, Sherlock arrived early enough, giving him plenty of time to rule out those waiting on the platform in advance. This way, he only needed to focus his attention on those who had just entered the platform. Even so, Sherlock was a little surprised. Because when he found Harry, he discovered that he had come alone and didn't look to be in good shape. This fact made Sherlock wonder if he had found the wrong person. Even if Harry didn't have parents, with his status in the magical world, it wouldn't be strange for 10 or 8 people to see him off, right? But he just happened to come alone. When you eliminate all impossible situations, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. So Sherlock understood that the hero who saved the magical world had not grown up in the world of wizards, but had stayed in the non-wizarding world. This also made Sherlock more interested in Harry. "Just call me Sherlock." Sherlock reached out and shook Harry's hand. "It's crowded up ahead, let's sit here, Potter, or can I call you Harry?" "Ah? Oh, okay." Harry nodded subconsciously. When he came to his senses, he found that Sherlock had already pressed him into the side of the carriage by the window. Then Sherlock brought all his luggage in, and also placed his pet owl Hedwig on top of it. Being arranged so clearly by Sherlock, whom he had just met, Harry didn't feel much aversion, but instead felt a lot more at ease. Stepping into the magical world for the first time, he was panicking a lot and needed a brother-like figure like this. He even had a bold idea deep in his heart. If only he could keep following Sherlock like this. Compared to his cousin Dudley, this new classmate, who looked very reliable, was more like a real brother. If Sherlock hadn't said it himself, he would have thought that the other party was an upperclassman. After the two settled down, Sherlock looked at Harry again. "It looks like you haven't been doing very well." Just one sentence made Harry feel a strong desire to confide. Looking at Sherlock's encouraging gaze, he told him everything that had happened to him over the years. At this time, Sherlock was a qualified listener. He kept nodding, and occasionally asked a few questions. After a conversation, Sherlock had a more comprehensive understanding of Harry. More interesting than he imagined. "So, your uncle sent you to the station today and then left on his own, but you were lucky enough to get help from others and finally made it here successfully." "That's right. I was still wondering why he suddenly became so nice. Wait, how did you know? Harry was talking when he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He looked at Sherlock in shock. I only said that I have been living in my relative's house all these years, but I didn't say that it was my uncle. Also, how did you know that I couldn't find the platform and got help from others? Sherlock was already used to Harry's reaction. Initially, he also enjoyed this feeling. After explaining his reasoning process in detail, looking at the surprised and admiring gazes of others, a sense of superiority arose in his heart. But after this happened many times, Sherlock had become accustomed to this reaction, to the point where it was boring. Now, he only feels that this ability is commonplace and not worth mentioning. Anyone can reach his current level with serious training. But others obviously don't think so. Like Harry in front of him. Looking at his appearance, Sherlock knew that if he didn't explain these things clearly, the friendly conversation between the two would not be able to continue. Chapter 11. Actually, deducing these things is very simple. Sherlock pointed at Harry's glasses and explained, normal families would never let you wear such broken glasses, patched up many times with tape, when entering a new school. Your clothes are neat, showing you have good habits, but the style is old-fashioned and obviously ill-fitting, hanging loosely on your body, much too large for your frame. So, I guess they are hand-me-downs from your cousin. The old trunk beside you is covered in bumps and wear, the marks of time clearly visible, indicating it has been in service for many years. Since it's a cousin, your relatives can only be uncles, aunts, or maternal aunts. According to the rise and fall of the dark arts and important magical events of the 20th century, your only remaining relatives are your mother's sister, so I deduce you live with your aunt and uncle. Based on these, it's easy to infer that they treat you. What did you say? The books mentioned me. Harry looked incredulous. Sherlock stared at him. It seems you haven't been reading properly. In fact, I know almost everything about you. The look of shock on Harry's face deepened. Sherlock gave him a smile. Not just those two books. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot, a required text for first-year students, also mentions you. Harry suddenly felt dizzy. He steadied himself and couldn't help but ask, then, how did you know Uncle Vernon brought me here today? I was about to get to that if you hadn't interrupted me. Oh, sorry. Harry apologized quickly, feeling like he always messed things up without realizing it. It's fine, just don't interrupt me again. There's a mark on the lower right corner of your baggy clothes where it was caught in a car door. As for why I can tell it was a car door and not something else, it's because the angle and force of the impact would create different effects. Obviously, this mark was made by the right door of a car. From your words and the earlier discussion about your attire, it's clear that you are a disciplined person, so you shouldn't have been late today, yet you were. You couldn't lift the suitcase by yourself, and based on your description of your awful relative, it's not hard to guess what he did. He wasn't willing to bring you here, dropping you off at the station just to see you struggle. For someone visiting for the first time, without keen observation skills, it's hard to find platform 9 and 3/4 between platform 9 and platform 10. I'm sorry, but based on my observations, you don't have that ability, so you could only have arrived here with someone else's help. Sherlock spoke very quickly, about twice the normal speed. Mainly because he felt there was really no need to analyze these things. Although the amount of information seems large, the evidence is as obvious as ink splashed on a blank sheet of paper. Of course, there are some things he didn't say. For example, he found Harry as soon as he entered the platform, and also figured out who helped him enter the platform. After Sherlock finished speaking, Harry spent several minutes fully understanding the meaning, and couldn't help but blurt out. That's amazing. Sherlock shrugged, he really didn't think this skill was worth showing off or praising. His appearance made Harry even more admire him. Harry was about to say something to express his admiration when the compartment door suddenly opened, and a red-haired head poked in. Sorry, everywhere else is full, can I come in here? Harry immediately looked at Sherlock. The red-haired boy's gaze followed Harry to Sherlock. Of course, Mr. Ron Weasley. Thanks. The red-haired boy agreed, but after pushing his trunk into the compartment, he suddenly realized something and asked in surprise. Wait, how do you know who I am? If you want to hide your name, Sherlock pointed, seeing Harry also looking at him with curiosity, I suggest you don't hang a name tag on your trunk, or when you talk to others, don't face the tag towards them. The red-haired boy looked down and was stunned. He had even forgotten about this. This person seems very impressive. Looking at the red-haired boy's expression, Harry suddenly felt much better. It wasn't that he was too stupid, but that Sherlock was too amazing. While Harry was secretly relieved, the boy had already sat down next to Harry. Mainly because he felt that Sherlock's aura was a bit strong, so he chose the other person. Compared to Harry, Ron's performance in front of Sherlock wasn't much better, he was also a bit nervous. In this situation, Sherlock naturally had the absolute initiative. He was also somewhat interested in Ron. According to records, the Weasley family is one of the sacred 28 pure-blood families, with a long history in the wizarding world. Red hair is the iconic feature of their family. The so-called sacred 28 families refer to wizards or wizarding families who possess pure or nearly pure wizarding blood. This is also a knowledge point introduced in *A History of Magic. Originally, he planned to use Harry as his entry point to understand the magical world. But from his contact with Harry just now, Harry Potter, who grew up in a normal family, knows even less about the magical world than he does, having read books for a month. In this case, Ron, who comes from the Weasley family, is a very suitable candidate. "I'm Sherlock Holmes, just call me Sherlock." After introducing himself, Sherlock pointed, "He is Harry Potter." After saying this, he stopped. Because he had already guessed Ron's next reaction. Ron didn't disappoint him. "Harry Potter? Wait, you said he's Harry Potter. That Harry Potter?" Ron's voice suddenly rose. He immediately realized that this wasn't good and quickly lowered his voice, looking at Harry in disbelief and asking, "You're that Harry Potter?" Ron stared straight at Harry. Obviously, the surprise this brought him exceeded Sherlock's deduction of his identity. Noticing that Harry's face was getting redder and redder under Ron's gaze, and he couldn't say a word, Sherlock simply answered Ron's question for Harry, "Obviously." This made Harry and Ron both breathe a sigh of relief, and Harry gave Sherlock a grateful look. "It's unbelievable, I'm actually in the same compartment as Harry Potter." Although he already knew Harry's great influence through books, Ron's performance at this time was the first time Sherlock had seen it confirmed in reality. This is becoming more and more interesting. At this moment, Harry also lifted the hair on his forehead, revealing the scar to Sherlock and Ron. Ron widened his eyes in surprise. "This is what the Dark Lord did?" "Yes," Harry nodded, "but I don't remember it." Ron eagerly asked again, "Don't remember anything at all?" "Well, I only remember a lot of green light, I don't remember anything else." "Green light? What's that?" "I don't know." Chapter 12. After all the young wizards were seated, the Hogwarts Express officially started, and the scenery on both sides of the windows began to speed backward. At this time, Harry and Ron were no longer as reserved as when they first met. Especially Harry, he found that he and Ron were very interested in each other's families. They asked and answered, and their understanding deepened rapidly. Sherlock did not join in. Just through the conversation between the two, it was enough for him to make inferences about their situation. Instead, he was more interested in the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead. Of course, in Sherlock's view, that scar looked more like a capital letter N than the legendary lightning. At this time, Harry and Ron were getting more and more excited. Ron, in high spirits, decided to show his two friends from Muggle families some magic. "George told me a spell that can turn it yellow." It refers to Ron's pet, a grey rat named Scabbers, which was a pet eliminated by his older brother Percy, who is a prefect. Ron said, opening his suitcase and rummaging inside. The suitcase was very messy. He moved away a pile of books and pulled out 2 robes. After a long time, he finally pulled out a wand. "Do you want to see?" He looked at his 2 little friends with anticipation. "Hurry up," Harry said immediately. Sherlock also watched Ron with interest. During this summer vacation, he had tried many spells and succeeded. Logically speaking, his talent for magic should be okay. However, he was powerless when it came to transfiguration, like McGonagall turning a teacup into a squirrel. Of course, after reading the textbook, Sherlock also knew that it was not a first-year teaching content, it was beyond the syllabus. Under the gaze of his 2 friends, Ron cleared his throat and waved his wand. "Daisy, Buttercup, Mellow, turn this stupid fat rat yellow." 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The rat, Scabbers, was still grey, sleeping soundly, and was not affected in any way. "Harry! Sherlock!" Ron was stunned, raised his wand again, and tried again. "Daisy, Buttercup, Mellow, turn this stupid fat rat yellow. Still nothing happened. Harry. Sherlock. Okay, I knew this spell was useless. I bet George knew it was a dud. Ron said with a disappointed look, putting away his wand. Is it its problem? Hearing Sherlock's question, Ron didn't react. What? Your second brother's wand. Sherlock pointed to Ron's wand. This wand was very old, some places were peeling off, and one end was flashing white light. Oh, this is Charlie's old wand. The unicorn hair is almost exposed, but my dad said it won't affect the use. Ron touched the old wand carefully, and suddenly raised his head. Wait, why do you know this is an old wand? Ron, even I can see that this is an old wand. Harry couldn't help but say. He was secretly happy, vaguely feeling that his IQ had occupied the high ground. No, I mean, how do you know it's my second brother's wand? I haven't told you how many brothers I have. That's right. Harry then reacted. He could indeed see that this was an old wand, but Sherlock directly said that it was used by Ron's second brother. This is too outrageous, right? Sherlock smiled. I not only know that this is your second brother's wand, but also know that there are 7 children in your family. You are now wearing your eldest brother's robe, holding your second brother's wand, using your third brother's pet, your fourth and fifth brothers are twin brothers, and there is also a sister who has not gone to school. Harry and Ron were stunned. The two couldn't say a word for a long time. Finally, Ron blushed and muttered. Sherlock, it's not interesting to tease people like this. You must have investigated me in advance. Harry couldn't help but help Ron to speak. Sherlock, you actually knew Ron's family before, right? Otherwise, you couldn't possibly know these things. At this moment, the two formed a united front, affirming that Sherlock had investigated Ron in advance. Sherlock was used to this kind of reaction from the two. Dear Harry, in fact, it is very simple for me to make these inferences. As long as you observe carefully and analyze carefully, you can also infer these information. Think about my analysis of you just now. In fact, it is not worth mentioning at all. When I say the process of inference, you will definitely say, ah, it turns out it's so simple. Harry was dubious. Really? I don't believe it. Ron shook his head like a rattle drum. You must have investigated me in advance. Compared to Ron, Harry's performance was better. After all, he had seen it once just now. But now he is also skeptical about this. After all, the information that Sherlock inferred from Ron was too detailed, and it was simply incomparable to the inference about himself just now. Looking at the two pairs of eyes full of thirst for knowledge, Sherlock smiled and said. Okay, then I will explain it. Ron's robe, wand, textbooks, including the suitcase he carries are all old, which is enough to show that he was born in a family with many children. Sorry, I took a few more glances when you opened the suitcase to rummage just now. Your robe has been altered once and is a bit ill-fitting. I think when you put it on later, your sneakers will be exposed. The old wand is too obvious. Even Harry saw it just now. Harry. But that doesn't mean the wand is my second brother's. Ron couldn't help but say. Sherlock shrugged. Generally speaking, wands and robes are purchased at the same time, but judging from the degree of newness of your wand and robe, the purchase time of the robe is obviously longer than the wand. Items like wands and robes are only left to the children in the family who are still in school after leaving school, so your two brothers must have graduated. In addition, when you cast a spell on me just now, you mentioned that Scabbers was given to you by the brother who is a prefect, and you also said that the spell was taught to you by George, then it means that you have at least 2 more brothers. Coincidentally, I saw you talking to a pair of twin brothers on this train. No one would suspect that you are not a family, you have the same red hair and similar faces. But there is no prefect among them. The prefects are in the 2 compartments specially designated at the front, which is not difficult to find out. Based on the above information, it is not difficult to infer this, right? Look, based on this information, I can easily infer that you have 5 brothers. The robes and wands are from the graduated eldest brother and second brother respectively, and the pet is from the third brother who is a prefect, and the fourth and fifth brothers are twins. But how do you know I have a sister? You may not have noticed, but there are a few strands of long red hair on your shoulders, and the age is similar to yours based on the hair quality and color. So you should also have a sister. The possibility of a sister is greater. This is also the only piece of information that I guessed rather than inferred, but I think this guess should be correct. I think she should not have gone to school yet, right? Chapter 13. After Sherlock finished explaining his reasoning in one breath, Harry and Ron were dumbfounded. After a moment, Harry, who had already witnessed Sherlock's abilities, was the first to react. That's amazing. Sherlock, you're really incredible. Hearing you say it like that, it all seems so obvious. See, I knew you'd say that, dear Harry. Sherlock shrugged, then turned to Ron, earnestly offering advice. If you can, you should get a new one. Used books and robes are fine, but you should choose a wand that suits you, otherwise it will affect your learning of spells and spell casting. Ron's face flushed red. It's okay, even though it's old, my brother's wand is quite handy. Sherlock understood. No money. Out of admiration for Sherlock's abilities, Harry and Ron changed the subject and began to earnestly ask him for advice. The two then learned that Sherlock called this method of reasoning deduction. It is a method based on observation, analysis, and logical reasoning. It involves keenly capturing various details and then using knowledge and logical rules to make inferences, thereby drawing conclusions about events, people, and many other aspects. To use it proficiently, one needs a broad range of knowledge and meticulous observation, as well as the comprehensive application of induction and deduction. Although Sherlock said that anyone could do it with some training, Harry and Ron shook their heads repeatedly. Just kidding, this kind of thing is obviously a talent, impossible to learn. But this did not affect the trio's discussion. Just as the atmosphere was heating up, the compartment door was knocked on. Two young wizards appeared before them. Sherlock happened to know both of them. One of them was a round-faced little boy. He happened to be a subject of Sherlock's deduction while waiting at the station. At the time, Sherlock's deduction was new student, parents not present for unknown reasons, raised by grandmother, forgetful, timid, lacking confidence. However, looking at his tear-streaked face at this moment, even without Sherlock's analysis, Harry and Ron could tell that he was both sad and aggrieved. As for the other, with long brown hair, slightly large front teeth, and an arrogant expression, it was Hermione Granger, whom Sherlock had seen at the entrance of the Leaky Cauldron before the start of school. Unlike Sherlock and the others, Hermione had already changed into her new robes. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville lost a toad. It must be said that her tone, coupled with that expression, made her seem somewhat arrogant and condescending. Harry was okay, but Ron frowned directly. Just then, Hermione heard a familiar voice, "We haven't seen a toad, Miss Granger." Harry and Ron immediately looked at Sherlock in surprise. Ron couldn't help but ask. "Wait. How did you figure it out this time? She's not carrying a suitcase." He tried to observe Hermione like Sherlock, trying to find clues on her that could reveal her identity. The result was naturally futile. Sherlock shook his head. "We met once before." So they knew each other before. This explanation relieved Harry and Ron. They almost thought that Sherlock, like just now, could directly deduce the little girl's identity just by seeing her once. That would be too exaggerated. Seeing Sherlock, whom she had met once before, Hermione was also a little surprised. Unlike Harry and Ron, she was originally an extroverted person, but the initial impression Sherlock had left on her was too amazing, so she seemed a little shy. Now that a month had passed, she had returned to her original personality, and at this moment, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Holmes! What are you doing here?" After saying this, she sat down in the empty seat next to Sherlock. Not to mention Harry and Ron, even Sherlock was a little surprised by Hermione's behavior. He was a little puzzled. Was he that familiar with Hermione? The two had only met once. However, this was just the beginning. What followed was Hermione's performance that showed Sherlock and the others what a social butterfly was. "Oh, I was going to call you, but I forgot when I got busy. Have you finished reading those textbooks?" Faced with Hermione's greeting as if they were old friends, Sherlock nodded. "I've finished reading them." "I knew it." Hermione's eyes lit up, and she began to talk non-stop. "Have you tried the spells?" "I've tried a few simple spells at home, just for practice, and they all worked. Also, I forgot to tell you last time, no one in my family understands magic, so when I received the admission letter, I was very surprised, but also very happy. As far as I know, this is the best magic school. I've memorized all the textbooks now, of course, I only hope that it will be useful." Once she started talking, she couldn't stop, talking non-stop. Just like when they saw Neville just now, even without Sherlock's analysis. Harry and Ron had already judged what kind of person this little girl was. No matter which house I'm sorted into, I don't want to be with her. Ron thought to himself. Who knew that Hermione would turn her attention to the wand in his hand that he hadn't had time to put away? Oh, are you casting a spell? Then let us see. Ron was immediately a little at a loss. His spell hadn't worked just now, and it was okay to make a fool of himself in front of Sherlock and Harry. After all, in Ron's heart, these two already belonged to his own people. But in front of Granger and Longbottom, looking at the round-faced little boy with tears in his eyes, and then at the little girl staring at him intently, he subconsciously turned his pleading gaze to Sherlock. At the same time, Harry was also looking at Sherlock with hope. Big brother, please help. Sherlock understood the two's eyes. Ron's wand has a bit of a problem, let me do it. Sherlock drew his wand and gently waved it at Harry's glasses. Reparo. A series of fine sounds rang out, and Harry's broken glasses, which had been taped many times, became brand new in full view. Harry was stunned. He took off his glasses in disbelief and examined them carefully. Ron also leaned over, and the two found that the glasses had actually become like they were when they were first manufactured, brand new. Hermione also looked at Sherlock in surprise. The repairing charm can repair damaged items, returning them to their original state. Hermione herself could also do it, but she could see that Sherlock's proficiency was even above her own. Adding to the fact that Sherlock had said her parents were doctors at the entrance of the leaky cauldron. This made her, who had always been a top student, suddenly feel a sense of crisis. Hermione cleared her throat, preparing to comment on the spell Sherlock had cast, when she suddenly noticed the scar on Harry's forehead after he took off his glasses, and asked in surprise. Are you Harry Potter? The boy who defeated Voldemort? Harry was stunned for a moment, then replied, he is, I mean I am, but Voldemort didn't die, he should still be alive. Sherlock frowned, this involved his blind spot of knowledge. Harry, you said Voldemort is still alive. Yes, Hagrid told me, although he is weak and decrepit, he may not be dead. Just like that, Sherlock, Harry, and Hermione discussed Voldemort recklessly and unreservedly, while Ron and Neville were silent and trembling with fear. Chapter 14. The Last Carriage of the Hogwarts Express. Listening to Sherlock, Harry, and Hermione loudly discussing forbidden topics, Neville Longbottom even forgot about looking for his pet. He wanted to speak several times, but the words trembled on his lips before he stopped. Ron, watching their normal conversation, hesitated many times as well. Until he couldn't bear it any longer and finally mustered the courage to interrupt them. Wait a minute, you actually said the Dark Lord's name. Why not? Sherlock looked at Ron, who was almost out of breath, and Neville, who genuinely was, and asked curiously. Are you scared? He knew that the wizarding world was very wary of the name Voldemort, otherwise, books wouldn't use he who must not be named to refer to him. But he didn't expect that even after more than a decade, his influence remained. Just mentioning the name with Harry and Hermione was enough to unsettle them. Seeing Ron and Neville nodding repeatedly, Hermione couldn't help but ask curiously, why be afraid? Of course, because. Ron wanted to answer but suddenly realized he couldn't explain it clearly. After a moment of thought, he murmured, my parents used it to scare me since I was little. All wizarding families tell their children that this person's name is taboo. Unless absolutely necessary, I don't want to mention his name, or rather, no one wants to. Neville nodded repeatedly, indicating he felt the same. Ron looked at Harry with admiration, but thinking about it, it makes sense, after all, it's you. Harry hesitated for a moment but still explained. Saying his name isn't because I'm brave or anything, but because I never knew that name couldn't be said. Do you understand what I mean? Hermione nodded in agreement. For those born into non-wizarding families, it was indeed the case. Voldemort was less scary than my mom calling me by my full name. You can say it, there's nothing you can't say. Amidst their surprised gazes, Sherlock said calmly, fear comes from the unknown, the best way to eliminate fear is to face it. Seeing Ron and Neville as frightened as quails, Sherlock directly offered a solution. Harry and Hermione nodded repeatedly. Ron and Neville looked at Sherlock with admiration. Amazing! But that was all. Even though they felt Sherlock was right, the education they received since childhood didn't allow them to do so. Hermione and Neville stayed in the compartment for a while, until a smiling woman opened the door and asked if they wanted to buy snacks. then they got up to continue searching for Neville's toad. Before leaving, Hermione didn't forget to remind Ron to get a new wand, as using an old wand could lead to spell failures. Ron. Strangely enough, Ron could accept the same words from Sherlock. But when they came from Hermione, Ron felt very uncomfortable. No matter which house I'm sorted into, I hope I'm not with her. As soon as Hermione left, Ron directly voiced his true feelings. Harry nodded absent-mindedly, his attention still on Sherlock. This good friend he had just met was truly amazing. At this moment, Sherlock was already standing in front of the snack vendor. He looked with curiosity at these snacks he had never seen before. Just by their appearance, these little snacks were full of magical aura. Seemingly insignificant things were precisely what initially drew him into the magical world. "Did you guys bring lunch?" Sherlock looked towards Harry and Ron. Harry shook his head. To be fair, except for punishments, the Dursleys didn't let Harry go hungry. But they also never really let him eat his fill. His cousin Dudley would always snatch away what he wanted to eat. Under such circumstances, they naturally wouldn't prepare lunch for him. Ron whispered that he had brought sandwiches. Seeing his ears turn red, Sherlock immediately understood. He wanted to eat, but he had no money. Sherlock didn't say much, asked for the prices, and bought some of each. In the end, it cost less than 12 silver sickles. Not too expensive, not too cheap. "I'll treat everyone to a meal, but these are all snacks, so Ron, give me your sandwich to fill my stomach first." Hearing Sherlock say this, Ron nodded eagerly. His mother always forgot that he didn't like corned beef, and Sherlock's suggestion suited him perfectly. Moreover, for him, snacks were originally more appealing than corned beef sandwiches. Harry nodded without much hesitation. This was the first time a peer had shared food with him, and the feeling was quite wonderful. Through this period of interaction, Sherlock had clearly understood their personalities. Harry seemed aloof and introverted, but subconsciously he was a strong and brave person, so his confident self could accept his kindness. On the other hand, Ron, who seemed carefree, had always lived in the shadow of his 5 excellent older brothers and was actually a bit inferior inside. If he directly offered to treat him to food, he would definitely find it difficult to accept. But changing the wording like exchanging now would make him feel at ease. Moreover, Sherlock wasn't lying, he indeed felt he should have some staple food before eating snacks. To his delight, Mrs. Weasley's cooking was good, and the beef was delicious. Next, the three began to feast, and the carriage was soon filled with the aroma of food. Ron also began to use his expertise to introduce Sherlock and Harry to various snacks full of magical characteristics. For example, chocolate frogs were not real frogs but a type of bar chocolate with a creamy filling. The milk was rich, silky smooth, with a pure, smooth, and easy-to-melt texture, bringing consumers a new taste experience. The taste was very good, and young wizards liked them very much. However, Sherlock and Harry's attention was more focused on the picture cards that came with these little snacks. Each pack of chocolate frogs came with a card, the front featuring portraits of famous people in the wizarding world, and the back featuring biographies. Harry got a card of Hogwarts headmaster Dumbledore. The photos in the magical world were different from those in the non-magical world, people in the photos could move. So, when Harry finished reading Dumbledore's biography and flipped the card to the front, he was surprised to find that Dumbledore's face was gone. You can't expect him to stay there all the time. Ron saw Harry's surprise and casually explained. When Harry told Ron that people in the non-magical world never changed once they were photographed, it was Ron's turn to be surprised. Then they don't move at all. That's amazing. While speaking, Dumbledore slipped back into the picture. Harry couldn't help but praise, "That's really amazing, Sherlock, aren't you surprised?" Sherlock took a bite of the chocolate frog, the taste was indeed good. He took the card from Harry, looked at the white-bearded old man who disappeared and reappeared, and smiled, saying, "This kind of thing can actually be done without magic." Chapter 15. In 1987, a bitmap file format called GIF was born. This brand new format enabled dynamic image display, with the actual effect being similar to the character cards in Chocolate Frogs. In 1989, the GIF format underwent a version update, truly achieving animation functionality. In this respect alone, it was even more advanced than the portraits in the magical world. Sherlock's explanation once again surprised Harry and Ron with his extensive knowledge. The two exchanged glances, feeling that this new student in their year knew everything. This was just a small interlude. In short, Chocolate frogs gave Sherlock and Harry not only Dumbledore, but also Morgana, Hengist, Alberic, Circe, Paracelsus, and Merlin after some trading. With explosive luck, they even managed to get an SSR rare card each. Zhou Yan and Kong Bo from China. The former was a famous alchemist who lived during the Warring States period in the 4th century BC. The latter was a dragonologist from the 15th century who discovered the uses of Chinese fireball dragon egg powder. Ron was very envious of this. Because this stuff was hard currency among Hogwarts students, some rare cards could even be exchanged for a week's worth of homework. His own Kong Bo card was given to him by his second brother, Charlie, who was researching dragons in Romania. As for Zhou Yan, his brother had taken it to exchange for something else. Sherlock showed a thoughtful expression upon hearing this. It seemed that in this aspect, magic schools were not much different from ordinary schools. Next, Ron warned Sherlock and Harry about another snack, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Every flavor meant literally every flavor, with all sorts of tastes available. Not only were there traditional candy flavors like chocolate, peppermint, and marmalade, but also non-food flavors like leather, paint, and dirt. What's more, you might even get stimulating flavors like boogers, earwax, and pee. Sherlock thought for a moment and realized that with the development of technology, the non-magical world could actually do these things. But it really wasn't necessary. However, through his conversation with Ron, he found that the intersection of magic and science was indeed very interesting. Just as Harry plucked up his courage, planning to lick a strange grey bean that even Ron dared not touch, the compartment door was pushed open once again. This time, 3 young boys appeared before Sherlock. The one in the middle had light golden, almost white hair, with well-defined features and a very handsome appearance, though his complexion was slightly pale. Beside him were 2 unremarkable, one tall and one short, fat boys who, despite their looks, were quite sturdy. These 2 subtly guarded the little boy in the middle, like his bodyguards. Set off by them, the little boy looked even more handsome, his pale complexion even giving him a morbid beauty. In terms of appearance alone, even Sherlock was overshadowed. Sherlock only glanced at them and guessed their identity. The Malfoy family. Like the Weasley family, hair was also a characteristic of the Malfoy family. However, the former was red, and the latter was platinum blonde. At the same time, the Malfoy family, like the Weasley family, belonged to the sacred 28 pure-blood families. However, Sherlock was not the only one who recognized Malfoy at this time. Noticing Harry and Ron's gazes, Sherlock couldn't help but be a little surprised. He looked at Harry. "Do you know him?" It wouldn't be strange for Ron to know Malfoy, after all, they were from the same series. But Harry shouldn't have any interaction with him. Harry was also a little confused at this time. He didn't understand how Sherlock saw this, but he still nodded. He did recognize this pale-faced little boy with light golden hair. They had met once at Madame Malkin's Robes for All occasions in Diagon Alley when ordering robes. At the time, Harry's impression of him was not very good because he was arrogant and looked down on Hagrid. You had to know that Hagrid was his first real friend in all these years. At this time, the little boy had already spoken, "The whole train is buzzing," saying that Harry Potter is in this compartment. Obviously, he also recognized Harry, whom he had met once before, and was now staring at Harry with much more interest than he had in Diagon Alley. "So, that's you, right?" Harry nodded subconsciously. Since the other party was a friend of Harry's, Sherlock didn't plan to intervene. Who knew that after the little boy looked around the carriage, his gaze stopped on him, and he said contemptuously, "I didn't expect the famous Harry Potter to be sitting with a smelly mud-blood. How disappointing." Ron's face immediately changed. Malfoy continued to introduce himself. "I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. This is Crabbe, and this is Goyle. I'm here too." Before he could finish speaking, he heard a sneer. It was Ron who made it. Malfoy immediately turned his head, his eyes fixed on Ron, his gaze undisguisedly disgusted. "You think what I said is funny, do you? I don't even need to ask who you are. Red hair, old robes, a face full of freckles, and too many children to feed. My father told me that the Weasley family is like this. It's a disgrace to pure bloods." Ron was immediately enraged. Although Sherlock had said something similar just now, the same words coming from Malfoy's mouth felt completely different. Ron thought that it might be because Sherlock had used a dispassionate tone when describing his wearing old robes and using an old wand, simply stating objective facts. But Malfoy was purely mocking him. However, before Ron's anger could erupt, Malfoy turned to Harry once again, forcing a smile while extending a hand to him. "You'll soon find that some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You wouldn't want to be friends with the wrong sort, or low-life mudbloods, would you? I can help you with that." It was obvious that Malfoy was trying very hard to show goodwill to Harry. Unfortunately, his upbringing made him full of a condescending arrogance and a conceited arrogance even when showing goodwill to others. If Hermione's arrogance was on her lips, then his arrogance was on his face. More importantly, he belittled Harry's two newly met good friends. So his show of goodwill was destined to be in vain. Harry, who already had a bad impression of him, naturally didn't indulge him in this situation, and said coldly, "No need. I think I can tell who the wrong sort are myself." The smile on Malfoy's face froze. Having been slapped in the face in public, a faint blush appeared on his pale face. He withdrew his hand, which was left hanging in the air, and said slowly, "Potter, if I were you, I'd be very careful, or you'll end up going down the same road as your parents. They didn't know what was good for them. It was because they hung around with Weasleys and Hagrid, riff-raff like that, that they got influenced." As soon as Malfoy finished speaking, Harry immediately stood up. Ron stood up without saying a word, his face as red as his hair. Chapter 16. Although he had only known him for a short time, Ron already considered Harry a friend. Plus, Malfoy had not only offended Harry but also insulted Sherlock and himself, so Ron naturally had to stand up for them. Harry stared coldly at Malfoy. "Say that again." Although he was introverted and reluctant to argue with people, his parents were a red line for him, and he would never allow any insults. "Oh, you want to fight, do you?" Malfoy was a little surprised by the courage of Harry and Ron, but after looking at Crabbe and Goyle beside him, he sneered. He noticed out of the corner of his eye that Sherlock had not stood up with Harry and Ron, and the look of contempt in his eyes deepened. "Mudbloods are mudbloods, they have no guts at all. The Weasleys may be a disgrace to pure bloods, but they are much better than him." At this time, Crabbe and Goyle had already stepped forward with the awareness of lackeys, looking down at the three. In fact, Harry's heart was not as brave as he looked. Because Crabbe and Goyle were much bigger than him and Ron, he was a little nervous at the moment. Ron was about the same, and the two of them were just putting on a brave front. After all, they were still elementary school students, so the timidity that the two unconsciously revealed was immediately noticed by Crabbe and Goyle, and they became even more disdainful. As for Sherlock, they didn't take him seriously at all, just like Malfoy. A timid mudblood was not worth mentioning at all. So, after discovering that Harry and Ron were bluffing and Sherlock was timid as a mouse, Goyle took the lead. He stretched his evil hand towards the chocolate frog next to Ron. "These snacks are good, but now they're mine. Let go." When it came to food, Ron finally overcame the fear in his heart and lunged forward. Unfortunately, he was pushed down by Goyle before he could even touch him. Effortlessly. Seeing this situation, Harry was stunned. At this moment, Goyle, who was 2 heads taller than him, couldn't help but remind him of his cousin Dudley, who had been bullying him since he was a child. He wanted to do something, but the psychological shadow formed since childhood made his body a little disobedient. Watching Goyle laugh and tear open the packaging, a thought grew in Harry's mind. "I was bullied before I came to Hogwarts, and I'm still being bullied after I came to Hogwarts, so didn't I come here for nothing?" Just as Harry was about to fall into despair, Goyle, who was about to tear open the snack, suddenly let out a scream. A strong and powerful hand suddenly gripped his wrist tightly. Goyle screamed and waved his hand trying to break free, but the hand, though not big, held his wrist tightly like an iron hoop. "I say, you guys." Sherlock, who had been ignored by the three of Malfoy, slowly stood up. He pinched Goyle's wrist, with a look of helplessness on his face. "Before taking other people's things, shouldn't you say hello first?" Goyle couldn't help but bend over in pain. Sherlock was not short to begin with, and now that he stood up straight, he became the one looking down. "Sherlock!" Seeing this scene, Harry couldn't help but exclaim, his voice full of joy. At this moment, Sherlock's figure became incredibly tall in his eyes. Ron also struggled to get up from the ground, his eyes full of surprise as he looked at Sherlock. "A big shot is carrying them. Let him go." At this time, Crabbe also reacted and rushed towards Sherlock. "Careful." Harry finally overcame the fear in his heart and planned to help. But before he could rush up, the situation had changed. Facing Crabbe, who was rushing towards him, Sherlock nodded, "Okay." Saying that, he let go of Goyle's hand. Goyle immediately fell to the ground. However, before his body could land, he received a quick and vicious uppercut from Sherlock on his chin. At the same time, Crabbe also rushed over. Sherlock stretched out his leg as if inadvertently. Thump! Crabbe immediately fell flat on his face. Then Sherlock retracted the hand that gave Goyle the uppercut and gave Crabbe one as well. Goyle and Crabbe had already begun to hug their heads and howl in pain. Although these two could be considered physically strong among their peers, they were only 11 years old after all, and their ability to withstand blows was really not that strong. Moreover, they were facing Sherlock, a professional. At this time, Sherlock's eyes had turned to Malfoy, whose face had changed drastically and was constantly retreating, and gave him a friendly smile. "Mr. Malfoy of the pure blood family, would you like to try it too?" Sherlock's smile at this moment looked like a devil in Malfoy's eyes. He never expected that the other party could defeat Goyle and Crabbe with his own strength. No, it shouldn't be said that he defeated them, but rather crushed them. This guy doesn't look like a wizard at all. He no longer had the arrogance he had just now, and retreated again and again, quickly leaving the carriage. Crabbe and Goyle followed closely behind, also scrambling to escape. Sherlock did not stop them, letting them leave. At this time, Harry and Ron looked at Sherlock with only admiration. The previous thought appeared in Harry's mind once again: if only he could always follow him. "That was amazing, Sherlock, how did you do it?" "They are too weak." Sherlock didn't feel proud at all. "My family used to hire teachers to teach me some fencing and boxing." Boxing. Fencing. Harry and Ron looked at each other, and they couldn't help but imagine Sherlock wielding his wand like a long sword and fighting with others. A close combat wizard? It's so weird. Is mudblood a curse word? Sherlock suddenly opened his mouth, interrupting Harry and Ron's imagination. Harry looked at Ron in confusion, and Ron was stunned, as if he had not yet recovered from the shock just now. It was not until after a while that he explained in a low voice. "It is a very insulting and vicious term for muggles, very unpleasant, and only those evil, hopeless, and extremely bastard dark wizards would call muggles that." "I see." Sherlock showed a thoughtful look. "Is Malfoy also this kind of person?" "Not really." Although Ron hated Malfoy and his family, he didn't think they were that bad. So he added, "Those guys in Slytherin also call them that. Malfoy is definitely going to enter Slytherin." Hearing Ron's explanation, Sherlock thought for a moment and said, "Ron, I have 2 questions. Chapter 17. What's the problem?" Hearing Sherlock actually ask for his advice, Ron couldn't help but perk up. Because that sentence gave him the big shot needs me feeling. First, what are the characteristics of each of the 4 houses? Second, aren't you aware that the word muggle also carries discriminatory undertones? Sherlock put his palms together, propped up his chin, and looked at Ron expectantly, waiting for his explanation. What? Ron was shocked. Muggle, how could it be a derogatory term? He answered the second question first. After all, compared to the first question, the impact of the second question was a bit too much for him. Galloping Gorgons, he had never meant any discrimination when referring to muggles since he was a child. His father was even full of interest in the muggle world and treated them extremely kindly. It was precisely because of this that he was looked down upon by pure blood families like the Malfoys, who believed they had tarnished the honor of the sacred 28. But now Sherlock was saying that muggle was also a derogatory term? Impossible, absolutely impossible. Harry, who was beside him, also helped Ron explain, "Sherlock, you're wrong this time, Hagrid also calls them that." Sherlock shook his head, not explaining directly, but continuing to ask. "How do you spell muggle?" Muggle. Ron was still thinking, but Harry had already given the answer. Sherlock frowned. "Don't you notice anything wrong?" Ron still looked blank. Harry originally didn't think there was anything wrong either. But Sherlock had already reminded him, so he thought for a while and then realized. "You mean, the root?" Sherlock nodded, looking at Ron, who still looked confused, somewhat surprised. "So, wizarding families don't learn vocabulary?" Ron coughed twice, his ears turning red again. "We do. Of course, we learn. But I didn't notice anything wrong with this word." Sherlock looked at Harry. Although he didn't know why, Harry did understand Sherlock's look. So he took the initiative to explain to Ron, the root of muggle is mug. Isn't that a cup? Ron quickly retorted, in order to appear less ignorant. Harry sighed, besides cup, it has another meaning. At Sherlock's suggestion, Harry carefully explained to Ron that the root of muggle, mug, besides meaning cup, also meant fool. Ron opened his mouth in surprise, not knowing what to say for a moment. This piece of knowledge was indeed the first time he had heard of it. Sherlock was right, people from wizarding families really didn't study vocabulary properly. Seeing Ron's appearance, Harry said to himself in his heart. At the same time, he felt even more that Sherlock was amazing. Clearly, he grew up in a non-wizarding family like himself, but he not only knew so much about the non-magical world, was proficient in all kinds of knowledge, knew boxing and fencing, but even skillfully used magic. He's really amazing. Noticing Ron's low mood, Sherlock patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry too much, after all, fool is mug and not muggle, there's no problem continuing to use this term. I think the person who came up with this term in the first place didn't have a friendly attitude towards people who can't use magic. But, looking at Ron's tangled look, Sherlock simply explained 2 more sentences. The original language and writing are constantly changing with the development of the times. Some words were originally neutral, but later they will become derogatory. For example, Negro, initially did not have derogatory connotations, it originated from Latin and meant black, and was widely used in the United States before the 1960s. The truly derogatory word is nigger, but today, the term Negro is the same as nigger, and is also considered discriminatory. In a few decades, I'm afraid even black people will not be able to be used because of sensitivity. Harry was stunned. Then what should we call them? Who knows, maybe African American. Sherlock said with a sneer. Muggle is the same, initially containing derogatory meaning, but today, it has weakened to the point where it can be widely accepted. Harry and Ron looked at Sherlock with admiration, he was so knowledgeable. Just then, the compartment door was opened again and again. Hermione reappeared in front of them. What happened? Hermione looked at the candy scattered all over the ground, and asked with some doubt. Harry and Ron looked at Sherlock. The latter shrugged, Miss Granger, someone wanted to rob our snacks, but eventually left after being persuaded. Is that so? Hermione was a little disbelieving, she had just seen the situation when Malfoy and the 3 left with her own eyes. No matter how you look at it, that appearance didn't look like they were persuaded. You didn't fight, did you? Don't cause trouble before we even get there. She still had a proud tone. Ron tensed his face and was about to retort. But Sherlock said at this time, Ron, there's still the first question. What? Ron then realized that Sherlock had asked 2 questions, and he had only answered the second one. He couldn't help but feel annoyed. In front of Sherlock, he always seemed to be very slow. Fortunately, coming from the Weasley family, he really knew a lot about the 4 houses of Hogwarts, so he began to introduce them eloquently. Hearing Ron talk about this, Harry and Hermione became interested. Hermione, like before, sat next to Sherlock and listened carefully. Sherlock didn't care, but the more he listened, the more he felt that Ron's introduction was too subjective. In Ron's mouth, Gryffindor was a righteous and brave warrior, the reason being that the current headmaster and deputy headmaster of Hogwarts both came from this house, and his parents and several brothers were also from it. Similarly, he himself would most likely be assigned to this house. Ravenclaw was a nerd who only knew how to read, and the students there were eccentric and self-righteous. Hufflepuff was a group of unremarkable gluttons who had no special skills except for liking food. But this was acceptable, because Slytherin was full of despicable, shameless, insidious, and cunning villains. Combining the knowledge he had gained from books and Ron's personality, Sherlock immediately made a deduction. In the eyes of others, Gryffindor might be a group of reckless men who only knew how to cause trouble. At this time, Harry also interjected, Hagrid also said that he would rather go to Hufflepuff than Slytherin. Because Voldemort is from this house. When Sherlock mentioned this name, Ron couldn't help but shudder again. He looked at Sherlock with resentment. I know you're not afraid, but can't you take care of the feelings of people like us? Sherlock didn't care about other people's opinions, and after getting Harry's affirmative answer, he turned to Ron again. Among the 4 houses, Hufflepuff has the most people, right? How do you know? Ron was a little surprised. Oh, Merlin's beard, you're really amazing. Hearing Ron's answer, Sherlock nodded. Sure enough, all the people with personality problems went to other houses, then the remaining kind and obedient people naturally went to Hufflepuff. At this moment, a voice began to echo on the train. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes, please leave your luggage on the train, we will send it to the school for you. Sherlock immediately took action. Why are you directly? Hermione blushed when she saw this, and quickly retreated. Chapter 18. It's just taking off a coat. Ron muttered, watching Hermione leave with a red face, but it's great as long as she can leave. Harry and Ron also started changing clothes with Sherlock. He noticed Ron's sneakers, which, as Sherlock had said, were peeking out from under the robe. But he had no time to worry about it now, because he was too nervous. Ron looked pale, and he wasn't doing much better. After all, they were only 11-year-old children, suddenly leaving their hometown and coming to a completely strange place. It would be a lie to say they weren't nervous. As for Sherlock, it's better not to think of him as a child. The train gradually slowed down and finally stopped. It was completely dark, and as soon as the doors opened, the howling cold wind made the young wizards shiver. Sherlock's physical fitness was actually good among his peers, but he had just recovered from a serious illness, so he also found it unbearable. The cold and humid climate of Britain was on full display at this moment, and everyone was shivering from the cold. Just then, a ball of light appeared above everyone's heads, attracting the attention of the young wizards, followed by a rough voice. First-year students! First-year students this way! A giant over 3 meters tall appeared directly in front of everyone. It was precisely because he was so tall that the light from the lamp he was holding seemed so high. Sherlock immediately understood that this person was Hagrid, whom Harry had mentioned. However, Harry's description was a bit conservative. According to Sherlock's estimation, the other person was at least 3.5 meters tall. It can only be said that this is indeed the magical world. The tallest person in the Muggle world is only 2.5 meters. Although Hagrid had a big beard, he gave Harry a gentle smile. Harry, come over here, are you all right? Come on, follow me, are there any other first-year students? Watch your step. Okay, first-year students, follow me. Under the guidance of the giant Hagrid, the freshmen parted ways with the older students and walked down a steep, narrow path. It was dark and gloomy all the way until they rounded a bend, and the view suddenly opened up. The young wizards couldn't help but gasp in surprise. A black lake appeared in their eyes as if parting the clouds and seeing the sun. The calm lake surface rippled, appearing both quiet and mysterious. Even more captivating was the high mountain on the opposite shore of the lake. A majestic castle stood on the hillside, with towering spires and windows twinkling under the starry sky, attracting everyone's attention. Hogwarts, here we are. At this moment, all the young wizards unconsciously held their breath, quietly watching this scene. Until Hagrid spoke up to remind them. To commemorate the 4 founders of Hogwarts School, first-year students also row across the Black Lake like the 4 founders when they first enter the school to reach the castle. This was also the reason why the giant Hagrid asked the freshmen to follow him earlier. Because each boat could not hold more than 4 people, Harry and Ron naturally followed Sherlock, their big brother. As someone who had already met them before the start of school, Hermione also followed. This made Ron roll his eyes again. Is everyone on board? Forward. After confirming that all the first-year students were on board, Hagrid took a boat alone to lead the way. Of course, with his size, there was no room for a second person on the boat. A fleet of small boats sailed across the lake, and circles of ripples appeared on the calm lake surface. Some people stared silently at the towering castle, some tried to see if they could make the boat row faster, and some chatted about the future while rowing. Sherlock and his friends were the latter. Hermione took the lead. How will they determine which house we will be sorted into? Harry shook his head. Hagrid didn't say. The books Sherlock bought also did not mention this matter, as if everyone was consciously keeping it a secret. So the 3 of them looked at Ron together. Ron, being stared at by 6 eyes, couldn't take it and quickly said. It's through a test. Fred said it hurts us a lot, but I think he's joking. Sherlock shook his head. He must be joking. Thinking about it, it's impossible, it's just an entrance test, similar to a class placement exam in the Muggle world. How could it hurt the students? Ron was still a little worried. I hope so, but by the way, Sherlock, someone as smart as you will definitely be sorted into Ravenclaw, and I should be sorted into Gryffindor. Hermione raised her eyebrows when she heard this. Sherlock smiled and didn't answer. The time crossing the Black Lake was shorter than expected. When disembarking and clearing the empty boats, Hagrid also helped Neville find his toad, which made him ecstatic. But this joy quickly disappeared. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood in front of the castle gate and completed the handover with Hagrid. First-year students, Professor McGonagall. Thank you, Hagrid, leave it to me to take them from here. Seeing her serious expression, everyone subconsciously felt that this woman was not easy to deal with. The person who came was Minerva McGonagall, the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and head of Gryffindor House. When she saw Sherlock, a smile appeared on her serious face. Hello, Mr. Holmes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Professor McGonagall. The exchange between Sherlock and McGonagall surprised the nearby young wizards. Hermione couldn't help but nudge Sherlock with her elbow. Holmes, how do you know Professor McGonagall? Her action made Sherlock once again confirm that this little girl was a naturally sociable person. Seeing Harry and Ron's curious gazes, he told them about Professor McGonagall coming to his door to answer questions. I see. The three satisfied their curiosity, and then their attention was drawn to Professor McGonagall's words. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts, the opening banquet is about to begin, but before entering the hall, you must first determine which house you will each enter. Compared to Ron, Professor McGonagall's introduction to the four houses was much more objective. She specifically pointed out that each house has its own glorious history and has cultivated outstanding wizards. The four houses have never been superior or inferior, and no matter which house you are sorted into, you are a member of Hogwarts. After saying these things, Professor McGonagall led the freshmen into the Great Hall, and then left first to prepare for the sorting ceremony. During this period, more than 20 ghosts filed out of the walls, causing quite a stir and scaring the freshmen. Sherlock became very interested in these ghosts, something that current science cannot achieve. He tried to communicate with the ghosts, but they were talking among themselves and did not pay attention to these first-year students. Only a fat friar responded to him and suggested that he be sorted into Hufflepuff, because the fat friar used to be in that house. No causal relationship. Sherlock sighed, lost interest in continuing to communicate with the ghosts, and turned to observing the Great Hall. Chapter 19. Unlike its dark exterior, the interior of Hogwarts Castle can be described as magnificent and palatial. Interestingly, the ceiling overhead appears transparent, allowing one to see the twinkling stars outside. Noticing Sherlock's actions, Hermione whispered to him. It's enchanted to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. Sherlock nodded. Indeed, it was hard to believe there was a ceiling above, and equally hard to believe the hall wasn't open to the elements. Originally, when Sherlock saw the size of Hogwarts Castle, he thought his 7 years here would be quite cramped. But now it seemed the space inside was significantly larger than it appeared from the outside. It was simply unscientific. When something couldn't be explained, magic filled the gap. As Professor McGonagall returned, the ghosts floated through the walls and disappeared. By this time, all the teachers and students were seated, everyone staring at the first-year students, waiting for them to complete the sorting ceremony. Under the gaze of everyone, Professor McGonagall gently placed a four-legged stool in front of the first-year students and put a hat on it. Sherlock noticed that the pointed hat was patched, very old, and even from a distance, he could tell it was filthy. The next moment, the hat began to wriggle, and a wide crack appeared in the lower part of its middle, as if it were opening its mouth. Then it began to sing. You may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge what you see, I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. A ditty that sounded somewhat noisy to Sherlock was sung. The hat's singing wasn't great, and the tune was far below his violin level. However, it did provide Sherlock with some information. Mainly, it was an introduction to the four houses. Its introduction was equally objective and, compared to McGonagall, more professional. In short, Gryffindor brave, fearless, represented by the lion, symbolizing the element of fire. Hufflepuff just, loyal, represented by the badger, symbolizing the element of earth. Ravenclaw wise, learned, represented by the eagle, symbolizing the element of air. Slytherin cunning, ambitious, represented by the snake, symbolizing the element of water. The first-year students now understood that they only needed to put on the hat. I'm going to kill Fred. Ron couldn't help but say to Sherlock and Harry, he made it sound like we were going to fight a troll. Harry and Hermione both secretly breathed a sigh of relief, obviously very nervous earlier. Sherlock was naturally not nervous, just feeling that things were getting more and more interesting. At this moment, the sorting ceremony began. McGonagall held a roll of parchment, walked forward a few steps, and read out the first name. Hannah Abbott. A little girl with 2 golden braids stumbled out of the queue under the gaze of the entire school, nervously putting on the hat. Before anyone knew what happened, the hat shouted Hufflepuff. The people on the right table applauded and cheered for Hannah, welcoming her to sit at their table. The fat friar ghost who had greeted Sherlock also waved to her happily. Then, one by one, the new students were called out by McGonagall, wore the hat, were sorted, and took off the hat. Mechanical repetition, without any novelty. Soon, those who were with Sherlock were called by name. Hermione Granger. Hermione was very nervous, even forgetting to say hello to them, almost running to the stool. She hurriedly put the hat on her head. Finally, the hat shouted Gryffindor. Ron couldn't help but snort, obviously a little unhappy that the little girl might be sorted into the same house as him. Sherlock watched this scene with great interest. He didn't care about Ron's petty thoughts. What he cared about was the time it took the hat to sort. Sometimes the hat would immediately shout out the name of the house, but sometimes it would take some time to make a decision. For example, Hermione took nearly 4 minutes. This was the longest time spent by anyone who had been sorted, giving the impression that the hat was also hesitating. So, the question was, when it was his turn, how long would it take, and which house would he be sorted into? In fact, when the hat sang that little song, Sherlock had already thought about this question. The result was, anything was possible. Courage, he never lacked. The fundamental reason he chose to come to Hogwarts was his desire to explore the unknown. When necessary, he could even disregard life and death, a feeling that only made him more excited. Justice, one of his interests was fighting crime. Of course, the methods weren't exactly lawful good, but certainly not evil, and the result must be justice. Wisdom, needless to say. Although, because of his family, he once thought he was an idiot before meeting other children. Cunning and ambition, he undoubtedly possessed both, and from the Sorting Hat's little song, his arrogance and disregard for rules really matched Slytherin. So even Sherlock, who was good at reasoning and analysis, found it difficult to determine which house he would be sorted into. If only he could ask Hermione what would happen when she put on the hat, he believed Miss Granger would be happy to answer. Unfortunately, he couldn't ask. Because each new student would leave the current queue after determining their house and go to their own house where older students from the same house were waiting to welcome them. Just then, McGonagall saw that Hermione had already taken her seat amidst the welcome of the Gryffindor upperclassmen, and her gaze returned to the parchment. Her gaze paused slightly as she read out the name of the next new student. Sherlock Holmes. Hearing his name, Sherlock didn't say anything, but Harry and Ron suddenly became nervous. Don't go to Slytherin. You must go to Gryffindor. In addition to his 2 friends, there were naturally others who paid attention to Sherlock. The story of him teaching Malfoy and his cronies a lesson on the train had spread. Students who knew about it couldn't help but notice him when they heard this name. Not to mention that Sherlock already had an appearance and exterior that was enough to attract attention at first glance. In addition, McGonagall had also mentioned this little wizard with keen observation and analysis skills to Dumbledore. However, Sherlock walked to the stool, but didn't put the hat on his head directly like the others. He took the hat in his hand, carefully examining it while rotating it. The entire school was greatly surprised. McGonagall, who was hosting the sorting ceremony, was even more astonished. It's not like we asked you to come here to buy a hat, why are you picking one? She couldn't help but look towards Headmaster Dumbledore, who was sitting at the head table. Chapter 20. When Sherlock didn't put on the sorting hat but held it in his hands, examining it carefully, not only McGonagall but also Dumbledore became interested. He leaned forward slightly, but didn't say anything to stop him. Fortunately, Sherlock's observation didn't last long. Soon, he plopped the hat onto his head with a thump. Judging by its appearance alone, the hat was very old. After all, it was covered in so much grime, dirty and greasy, with a strong smell of head oil. I'm already quite sloppy, but I didn't expect the people in the wizarding world to be even less concerned about hygiene. The last person who wore it was a baker's son. Just as Sherlock was pondering, a faint voice sounded in his ear. Oh, I'm sorry to disgust you, but I'm just a hat and can't clean myself. But how did you know the last child was a baker's son? Sherlock was taken aback at first, then his eyes lit up. Interesting. You can see through people's thoughts. His thoughts were being captured by a hat. The magical world was indeed amazing. No, no, just some superficial thoughts, and only because you didn't deliberately hide them. I'm not a dark arts object, I don't have the ability of legilimency. The hat first explained, then continued, so, can you answer my question now? Feeling the hat's persistence, and out of interest in the hat itself, Sherlock obliged. It's simple deduction. Your brim has bits of tinfoil and white flour residue, and a wheat smell that covers the head. Oil odor, of course. The last little boy's behavior already indicated his family's situation, these are just further confirmations. Interesting. Wonderful. Unparalleled wisdom, admirable courage, a truly kind heart, a disregard for rules, difficult, too difficult. Disdain for authority, challenging the rules, you will achieve great things. With a thought, Slytherin will help you reach glory, no doubt about it. Wise and learned, with a love for research and an infinite thirst for the unknown, yes, Ravenclaw can enhance your insightful eyes and agile mind. Your wish is to punish evil and promote good, to fight crime? Oh, too bad. If Miss Hufflepuff were still here, she would love you. But your indomitable courage is even more fascinating. If I don't put you in Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall will kill me. I'm too conflicted. Feeling the Sorting Hat's entanglement, Sherlock calmly said, on this point, I believe that courage is the best substitute for stupidity. And so, Sherlock began a cordial and friendly conversation with the hat. The new student sorting ceremony in the Hogwarts Great Hall. The entire school fell silent. Is it that difficult? The last little girl lasted quite a while. This little boy is even more persistent. Noticing Sherlock's slender hooked nose, many older female students secretly noted the boy's name. Sherlock Holmes. The outside discussions grew louder, but Sherlock was oblivious. Of course, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. He was having a great time chatting with the hat. What? I can see that you are not lacking in courage. Dauntless courage can make you a hero. Don't turn people into heroes. Heroes don't exist, and even if they did, I wouldn't be one of them. But, emotionalism is a physiological defect of losers. Intelligence is the new sexy. The Sorting Hat was very troubled. Because this young wizard possessed characteristics of all four houses, theoretically, he could be placed in any of them. However, as the exchange with Sherlock deepened, the Sorting Hat began to lean in a certain direction. Mainly the choice between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. The hat originally planned to put him in Ravenclaw. After all, even Sherlock himself said that intelligence was the new sexy. But, before making a decision, the hat keenly noticed a problem. He found that Sherlock would only learn and understand the knowledge that he could use. This was at odds with the qualities possessed by Ravenclaw. If it were someone else, this small matter would naturally be harmless. But in Sherlock's case, this became the key to making a decision. Sherlock treated knowledge as a tool. He learned what was useful and didn't learn what wasn't, unlike true Ravenclaws, who were simply full of a strong desire and pursuit of knowledge. On the other hand, his courage was impeccable. He was extremely adventurous, and his inner courage was enough to sweep away all obstacles. Although Sherlock also said that courage was the best substitute for stupidity. But this was not a problem for him personally. Because he was truly brave. The Ravenclaw Eagles would spend their time learning knowledge and wouldn't have time to accompany him on adventures. Gryffindor was different, the little lions couldn't wait to team up with him. Finally, when Sherlock learned from the hat that Ravenclaw had many knowledge-based types of people, his eyes lit up. Great! This way, when he needed information, he could directly ask them without having to spend time learning it. And he would be able to free up more time for exploration. Thus, after much deliberation, the hat respected Sherlock's wishes and made a final decision. Gryffindor. Sherlock took off the hat, said goodbye to it, and walked to the Gryffindor table. Congratulations! Hermione was naturally very happy to be sorted with someone she knew. She was about to say something when Ron's two older brothers, the Weasley twins, squeezed over. We were just saying that Miss Granger almost became a hat stall, but we didn't expect the real hat stall to arrive. Hat stall? What's that? Hearing a new term, Sherlock became interested. It's when the hat feels very embarrassed. Because it doesn't know which house to put you in. You two shut up. The Gryffindor prefect, also the twins and Ron's older brother, Percy Weasley, rubbed his temples and said helplessly. They are the most famous pranksters in all of Hogwarts, Holmes. Don't listen to their nonsense. Before the start of the school year, Percy had bought a book called How Prefects Gain Power in Diagon Alley. The book said that prefects have a responsibility to maintain the good image of the house in front of new students. So, the twins must not be allowed to lead the new students astray even if they are his younger brothers. Then, he explained the official definition of Hatstall to Sherlock and introduced himself. Chapter 21. Hogwarts Castle. Professor McGonagall was still presiding over the sorting ceremony. However, her thoughts lingered on Sherlock Holmes, who had just been sorted into Gryffindor. She hadn't expected that this young wizard, who had left such a deep impression on her before the start of term, would be a true Hatstall, just like herself. This term, which playfully mocked the sorting hat, had a more common name, Hatstall. As the name suggests, it referred to students for whom the sorting process took longer than a certain amount of time conventionally agreed to be 5 minutes and whose personality traits were simultaneously suited to several different Hogwarts houses, making the sorting hat struggle to decide. True Hatstalls were rare, appearing only about once every 50 years. More often, there were students who were close to being Hatstalls. Like Granger, before Holmes. Many years ago, on McGonagall's first night here, she had attracted everyone's attention. Because the sorting hat had taken a full 5.5 minutes. Mainly hesitating between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. But in the end, it chose the former for her. Even today, she still felt that going to Ravenclaw would have been a good choice. Especially after becoming the head of Gryffindor, this feeling became particularly strong whenever she faced a group of reckless troublemakers. However, over the years, the sorting hat had always insisted on its opinion, believing that Gryffindor was more suitable for her. Calculating the time, it was indeed almost 50 years since she had entered the school. She had almost forgotten about it. She didn't expect that Sherlock Holmes and Hermione Granger would reawaken her sealed memories. You know, when the sorting hat was choosing a house for her current colleague, the head of Ravenclaw, Flitwick, it also hesitated for a long time. But in the end, the sorting hat made the opposite decision to McGonagall, sorting Flitwick into Ravenclaw. Over the years, this had inevitably become a topic of casual conversation between her and Professor Flitwick. They had both happily imagined that if they had been more decisive or more hesitant when they were young, their positions might have been swapped. Then today, McGonagall would be the head of Ravenclaw, and Flitwick would be the head of Gryffindor. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but look towards the stage. Sensing her gaze, Professor Flitwick gave her a smile. Clearly, Sherlock and Hermione had also reminded Professor Flitwick of McGonagall and himself back then. McGonagall withdrew her gaze and looked at Sherlock again, finding him talking to Percy, the Gryffindor prefect. She didn't know what Sherlock had said, but Percy's expression looked a little strange. Percy was indeed a little embarrassed. Because after listening to his explanation of Hatstalls, Sherlock had directly said, "Sounds like there's no difference, their explanation is easier to accept." With just one sentence, Sherlock had successfully choked Percy. Did this freshman even know how to talk? He was a prefect. Ha 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 ha. The twins burst out laughing. Well done. You have so much talent, follow us from today onwards. Yet, Holmes, we will definitely make a splash in front of the whole school. Sherlock. He ignored the twins and continued to watch the sorting ceremony for the other freshmen. After him, there were a few more freshmen whose sorting took a relatively long time, close to being Hatstalls. Like the round-faced boy who had lost and found his toad, Neville Longbottom. He tripped on the way to the stool and waited anxiously on the stool for nearly 5 minutes before being announced into Gryffindor. Then he ran off with the hat on his head. Amidst a burst of laughter, Neville had to trot back and return the hat to McGonagall. After him was Draco Malfoy, who was very proud of his bloodline. In contrast to Neville, the hat screamed almost as soon as it touched his head. Slytherin. It was so swift and decisive. Watching Malfoy swagger over to Slytherin to join his good buddies Crabbe and Goyle, Sherlock revealed a thoughtful look. From the current situation, whether it was himself and Hermione or Neville and Malfoy, these were just exceptions. Apart from them, most people spent about the same time as Hannah Abbott, who was called first, being sorted into their respective houses within half a minute. Occasionally, there were those who took a bit longer, but it was over in 2 or 3 minutes. Not to mention Hatstalls like Sherlock who took more than 5 minutes, there were not even many like Hermione and Neville who were close to being Hatstalls. From a scientific point of view, it conformed to the rules of normal distribution, with few at the extremes and many in the middle. Thus, the sorting ceremony proceeded in an orderly manner under the direction of Professor McGonagall, until she called out a name. Harry Potter. The attention received by the savior was undoubtedly the highest in the entire hall. When Harry walked out of the line of freshmen, a chorus of gasps echoed throughout the dining hall. Even the temperature seemed to drop. Potter, is she calling Potter? Is that Harry Potter? It's him. If your eyesight is good enough, you can even see the scar on his forehead. How is that even possible? At this moment, the twins couldn't help but speak up again. George turned to Sherlock. Holmes, I heard you're on good terms with Potter. Seeing Sherlock nod, Fred quickly followed up, then you must know him well? Which house do you think he'll be sorted into? This time, Percy didn't stop the twins from asking, because he was also very interested in this. The hat will take a long time, Sherlock replied without thinking, the final result is Gryffindor. Why? Hermione finally found an opportunity and quickly asked. Yeah, why? The Weasley twins also asked. Not only them, but also the people nearby who heard their conversation couldn't help but look at Sherlock. If Harry Potter could really come to Gryffindor, it would definitely be a great joy. But, why? How could Sherlock make a judgment before the sorting ceremony? Of course, it was because of personal experience. Judging from his own sorting experience, the hat respects personal choices. Based on Sherlock's understanding of Harry, apart from Ravenclaw, there was a good chance that Harry could be sorted into the other three houses, with Gryffindor and Slytherin having a slightly higher priority than Hufflepuff. But Harry himself didn't want to go to Slytherin, so that left Gryffindor. After listening to Sherlock's explanation, the little lions looked at each other. Wasn't this a bit too mystical? The Weasley twins wanted to continue asking, but this time Sherlock didn't say anything more. Seeing his appearance, everyone could only give up. Anyway, they would soon see if this guy was bragging. Chapter 22. Just as Sherlock had predicted, the sorting hat placed on Harry's head ultimately shouted out Gryffindor. The entire process took nearly 5 minutes, only slightly shorter than Sherlock's. At that moment, the nearby Gryffindor students stared at Sherlock in astonishment. Was he really that amazing? Not only had he guessed the outcome, but he hadn't missed a single detail of the process. This new student should have gone to Ravenclaw, shouldn't he? You really called it. Hermione was amazed by Sherlock once again, but her voice was quickly drowned out by thunderous applause and cheers. Without a doubt, Harry received the loudest cheers and applause of the entire hall. The Gryffindors welcomed Harry far more enthusiastically than they had Sherlock. It could be said that the entire house erupted the moment the sorting hat announced Gryffindor. As Harry walked towards the Gryffindor table, Percy, the prefect, stood up and shook Harry's hand tightly, unwilling to let go for a long enough that if Harry had been a girl, this behavior would have been considered harassment. The Weasley twins even shouted at the top of their lungs. We've got Potter! We've got Potter! At this moment, Harry was undoubtedly the protagonist. However, his gaze was fixed on Sherlock. A feeling of from now on, I have someone to rely on arose spontaneously, and without a word, he sat down right next to Sherlock. Compared to the sensation Harry caused upon his entrance, the sorting of those after him seemed quite ordinary. When only the last two remained, Ron was indeed sorted into Gryffindor along with his brothers. The sorting time was comparable to Malfoy's. Another student named Zabinai was sorted into Slytherin. The sorting ceremony officially came to an end. Looking at the final results, they completely matched Sherlock's previous predictions. Approximately half of the students were sorted into Hufflepuff, and the remaining three houses combined barely equaled that number. Indeed, only Hufflepuff was the backbone of the wizarding world. The other three houses all had their flaws to some extent anyway. Sherlock never considered himself a normal person. After Professor McGonagall rolled up the parchment with the names of the new students, picked up the sorting hat, and left, Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, stood up. He looked exactly like the picture Harry had once eaten in a chocolate frog card, an elderly man wearing glasses. His blue eyes were bright and piercing, his crooked long nose looked like it had been broken more than once, and his silver hair and beard showed that he was quite old. As for the constantly twinkling half-moon spectacles, they seemed to be able to see right through people. Welcome! At this moment, he looked at the students with a smile, extending his arms as if to embrace everyone. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts for the start of a new school year. Before the feast begins, I would like to say a few words. At this moment, All the new students couldn't help but recall the fear of being dominated by the principal's lengthy speeches in elementary school. However, what the headmaster did next greatly exceeded their expectations. He slowly opened his mouth and said, "Nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you." After saying that, he sat down. The speech at the Hogwarts opening ceremony lasted less than 5 seconds, emphasizing brevity and speed. Although they didn't know what Dumbledore meant, it felt like it was very impressive. Everyone applauded and cheered, not caring what he meant at all. "As long as you don't give a long speech, we're all good friends." Most importantly, everyone was already starving, and after Dumbledore finished speaking, all sorts of food suddenly appeared on the previously empty plates in front of everyone. Roast beef, roast chicken, French fries, ketchup, peppermint candies. It could be said that there was everything from staple foods to snacks. The returning students had long been accustomed to it, but the first-year students were frightened by this scene. Me and my little friends were stunned. JPG. Without needing to be reminded, everyone began to feast. "Sherlock, do you think he's a little crazy?" Harry asked Sherlock hesitantly. "Crazy?" Percy couldn't help but mutter when he heard Harry's words. "He's a genius. The greatest wizard in the world. But you're right, he is a little crazy. Let's eat first, would you like some potatoes, Harry?" Harry took the potatoes and looked at Sherlock again. He saw the latter frowning, as if he were thinking. Sherlock was indeed thinking. Regarding Dumbledore's seemingly meaningless speech, he had already come up with several explanations in an instant. First, it expressed a stereotype of the four houses: Hufflepuffs are all nitwits, Ravenclaw bookworms only blubber when things happen, Slytherins are all dregs, and Gryffindors are brave and stubborn. Second, it could also be the opposite extreme of the house's representative characteristics: Ravenclaw intelligence nitwit, Gryffindor courage blubber, Slytherin cunning ambition dregs, Hufflepuff honest and kind tweak. Finally, it could also be these four houses' views of others: Ravenclaw thinks everyone else is a nitwit, Gryffindor thinks other students are blubbering cowards, Slytherin is arrogant about pure blood and thinks others are dregs and wastes, Hufflepuff thinks other houses are too individualistic and tweaked. But it doesn't matter. He had already come to Hogwarts, and figuring these things out was only a matter of time. After a busy day, the new students were already starving. To be fair, the food and drink prepared for the new students at the Hogwarts opening ceremony was indeed good. It could already be called delicious after all, this was a country known for its dark cuisine. Sherlock wasn't picky about food and drink, but he would eat more when the taste was good. Harry didn't need to be told. Although the Dursleys hadn't let him starve, they had never let him eat his fill. So he ate everything on the table. When everyone was finished eating, the plates became spotless on their own, without any manual cleaning required. This situation once again amazed the new students. Seeing that everyone was full and satisfied, Dumbledore stood up for the second time. Compared to before, this time his speech seemed much more serious. "The autumn is crisp, the weather is turning cold, and another school season has arrived in the blink of an eye. In the new year, I hope that everyone can continue to work hard, constantly improve their ideological understanding, diligently study magic theory, continuously strengthen practical training, and achieve excellent results at the end of the semester. Upperclassmen should strictly demand themselves, take the lead in abiding by school rules and regulations, and set an example for the newly enrolled first-year students. New students should also follow in the footsteps of their predecessors, strive forward, be brave and determined, and work together to build Hogwarts into a first-class magic school in Europe and even the world. Finally, on behalf of the school, I would like to put forward the following requirements for the new students. First, earnestly abide by school rules and regulations, do not cast spells in the corridors between classes, and do not go to the Forbidden Forest or the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor. Second, actively participate in school activities, actively apply for Quidditch player review, and add glory to the college's sports cause. Third, strive to improve the sense of collective honor, and now the principal will personally conduct and lead everyone to sing the school song. The first 2 points were fine, but when Dumbledore mentioned singing the school song together, Sherlock noticed that the smiles of the other teachers suddenly stiffened. Something's fishy. Chapter 23. When Dumbledore mentioned singing the school song together, the other teachers besides him looked a bit awkward. Sherlock instinctively felt that there was something strange about it. Soon, he understood the reason. Dumbledore flicked his wand, and golden ribbons swirled in the air above the tables, forming lines of text. These were the lyrics. Then, everyone choose their favorite tune, ready, sing. All the first-year students? Is that allowed? As it turned out, it was. To various tunes, the entire school sang the school song in a scattered and disorganized manner, utterly lacking any artistic merit. The most speechless thing was that the Weasley twins were singing with the slow melody of a funeral march. Dumbledore not only didn't say anything, but patiently conducted the last few bars for them with his wand, and when they finished singing, his applause was the loudest. Sherlock. Looks like I really need to find a way to get a violin. After the sorting ceremony, speeches, dinner, and singing, the Hogwarts opening ceremony officially ended, and the students began to return to their dormitories. The scene immediately became chaotic. At this time, the prefects of each house were responsible for maintaining order, leading the students of their respective houses, especially the first-year students, back to the dormitories. The little lions, led by Percy, walked through the noisy crowd, out of the hall, and up the marble staircase. Compared to the other exhausted first-year students, Sherlock was much more energetic. His grey eyes sparkled, and he gazed intently at everything around him. There were so many new things here that even Sherlock was a little overwhelmed. The portraits hanging in the corridors were living beings, pointing and gesturing at the group of new students, and even talking to each other. Doors were hidden behind sliding panels and hanging curtains, and if Percy wasn't leading them, they wouldn't be visible from the outside at all. An invisible ghost named Peeves grabbed a cane and tried to tease them, but was scared away by Percy mentioning the Bloody Baron. Finally, they arrived at the end of the corridor, where a portrait of a plump woman asked, "Password?" Percy replied, "Dragon dung," and the fat lady moved aside, revealing a round hole in the wall. Everyone, led by Percy, climbed through the hole in the wall one by one. This was the Gryffindor common room. Percy directed the boys and girls to separate and go to their respective dormitories, and also informed the first-year students that they would receive their schedules at breakfast tomorrow, and reminded everyone not to forget to go to the hall on time. Based on today's performance alone, Percy could be said to be a very competent prefect. Compared to the radiant Sherlock, Harry, and Ron, these two unfortunate brothers were so sleepy that they could barely stand, and only managed to find their dormitory with Sherlock's help. Fortunately, the three of them were assigned to the same room. The other two roommates were Neville Longbottom, the round-faced boy who had lost and found his toad on the train, and a black-skinned boy named Dean Thomas. Seeing that his trunk had already been delivered to the room, Sherlock simply took a stroll around the common room. Gryffindor's aesthetic sense was quite good. The circular room as a whole looked very comfortable, the walls were in warm colors, mainly red, and the soft armchairs made people want to sit down and never get up. Originally, Sherlock planned to start exploring directly, but the temperature here was a bit low. Although his physical fitness was not bad, he had just recovered from a serious illness and found it difficult to resist the cold's erosion of his body. So, in this short period of time, he only figured out one piece of information: the Gryffindor Tower is located on the east side of the castle, and the common room is on the 8th floor of the tower. When Sherlock returned to the dormitory, he found that all four of his roommates were already asleep. 5 beds with 4 poster canopies, 4 of which had deep red velvet curtains drawn. The one left for him was right between Harry and Ron. "Looks pretty good," Sherlock commented, then changed into his pajamas and lay down. After all, it had been a busy day, and he hadn't felt it when he went to explore just now, but once he lay down, fatigue suddenly flooded in like a tide. Sherlock quickly fell into a deep sleep. Nothing happened overnight. The next morning, Sherlock opened his eyes and found that his 4 roommates were still sound asleep. Originally, he didn't plan to wake them up, but the noise he made when he got up woke Harry up all at once. Growing up with the Dursleys had given Harry the habit of waking up at the slightest noise. Seeing that the big brother he was preparing to acknowledge was ready to go, Harry quickly got up and asked, "Sherlock, where are you going?" When he heard Sherlock say that he was going for a morning exercise, Harry hesitated for a moment and decided to follow him. "Wise decision," Sherlock said with satisfaction. "A healthy body and a clear mind are the prerequisites for solving all problems." Harry nodded repeatedly, and he had realized this more and more clearly since he met Sherlock. Originally, he had also tried to summon Ron together. However, Ron had neither Sherlock's self-discipline nor Harry's determination to follow Sherlock, so after decisively refusing them, he continued to sleep soundly. In the end, Sherlock left the dormitory with Harry and began their first exploration of Hogwarts. During the morning exercise with Harry, Sherlock unexpectedly discovered that this savior of the magical world had some potential. Due to Harry's upbringing living in a dark and confined storage room for many years, and never having enough to eat or drink, he appeared smaller than his peers. A gaunt face, protruding kneecaps, and messy black hair, coupled with green eyes, were his greatest physical characteristics. Originally, the round-framed glasses that were taped together with many transparent tapes had been repaired by Sherlock with magic. He was now wearing a robe that fit his figure. Otherwise, wearing Dudley's old clothes, he would have looked even smaller than his actual size. But, although Harry was thin, he was agile and reacted quickly, a flexible player. If he was properly trained, he would definitely have a great future. In view of this, Sherlock decisively extended an invitation. "You have talent, learn boxing with me, Harry." In the end, Harry still didn't agree to Sherlock. Although he also thought that boxing was very cool, it was a bit too strange for a wizard to run to fight people in close combat, wasn't it? Sherlock couldn't help but feel a little regretful about this. According to his expectations, he still needed 1 or 2 assistants at Hogwarts. It just so happened that he was getting along well with Harry now, and he had originally planned to train the other party well. Unexpectedly, he refused. After the morning exercise, Sherlock and Harry arrived at the hall. Ron the foodie, Neville the round-faced boy, and Thomas the little black boy were already in place. Chapter 24. Seeing Sherlock and Harry, Ron and Thomas immediately stood up and waved at them enthusiastically. "Sherlock, Harry, over here." When the two approached, Ron said triumphantly, "I saved you guys seats." "Thanks," Harry thanked Ron, and reminded him, "It would be great if you could be a little quieter." Because of Ron's flamboyance, coupled with the name Harry, Sherlock and Harry became the center of attention in the hall at that moment. "It's over there, look quickly." Where? "Over there. Next to the tall, hook-nosed boy." "You mean the one wearing glasses?" "Yeah, did you see his face? Did you see the scar on his forehead?" As Sherlock and Harry walked through the hall towards Ron, these whispers never stopped. This made Harry extremely uncomfortable. Ron also noticed the situation and touched his nose sheepishly. "Sorry. It was all his fault for speaking too loudly." Breakfast under normal circumstances was definitely not as lavish as the welcoming feast, but it was definitely not bad, and most importantly there was plenty of it. This was definitely a good thing for foodies like Ron and Harry, who hadn't been able to eat their fill at home. As for Sherlock, he was multitasking, eating while focusing his attention on the Gryffindor first year's schedule. Monday morning, History of Magic, afternoon, Herbology. Tuesday morning, Herbology, afternoon, Charms, Transfiguration. Wednesday morning, Defense Against the Dark Arts, afternoon, Herbology, evening, Astronomy. Thursday morning, Transfiguration, afternoon, Charms. Friday morning, Potions, double period, afternoon, free. There was also a note, once flying lessons started, they would be added after Charms on Thursday afternoons. It could be seen that the first year's curriculum was generally quite tight, which was understandable. After all, it was necessary to reshape the worldview of the young wizards who had just entered the magical world. After breakfast, the group hurried to the classrooms. For Sherlock, the first week at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was both fulfilling and interesting. Each course had different characteristics. History of Magic was the only course taught by a ghost. As the saying goes, a ghost's lecture is full of nonsense. The course was purely theoretical, leaning towards rote memorization. In addition, Professor Binns recited the textbook in a monotonous voice peculiar to ghosts, which made the course even more dull and boring. Almost all the students were just drowsily jotting down names and dates. Only 2 people were exceptions. One was Hermione, who had already shown the characteristics of a top student in the first class. Listening attentively, taking notes seriously, actively answering questions, well, not the last one, because Professor Binns didn't ask any questions. The other was Sherlock. He was full of interest in the magical world. He had already read all the textbooks, and listening to this ghost professor's class was equivalent to opening the audiobook function for people who didn't want to read. But when a student took the initiative to ask questions, Professor Binns would still interact with you. Sherlock was precisely that person. This made him the most conspicuous one among the sleepy little lions. Even Hermione, who was also listening attentively, couldn't help but cast curious glances at him frequently. "This person is like me," Compared to history of magic, herbology was much more interesting. The 3 times a week course schedule was enough to show that it was a basic course. The professor of this course, Pomona Sprout, was a short, stout witch, and also the head of Hufflepuff House. The learning location was the greenhouse behind the castle rather than indoors. As for the content, it was to educate the new students on how to cultivate these strange plants and fungi, and to understand their uses. This time, in addition to Sherlock, another student actively asked questions, Hermione. Perhaps stimulated by Sherlock's performance in the history of magic class in the morning, Hermione even stayed around Sprout after class. Unfortunately, she had to teach other people, so these questions could only be left to be answered tomorrow. The next morning, Hermione was still a good student who actively asked questions. Her continuous excellent performance in the 2 classes even earned Gryffindor 5 points, winning applause. But Sherlock was not as active as yesterday. He simply completed Sprout's tasks step by step, without asking a single question. Because Sherlock felt that it was no longer necessary. Having read the textbook in advance, coupled with the inquiries in the first class, was enough for him to have his own unique understanding of this course. That was enough. Next, Sherlock treated every course with the same routine. Ask questions in the first class, grasp the direction and overall situation of the course, and then filter. For those courses that were not very useful to him, he only needed to ensure that he could pass the exam. Then free up his energy to put on those courses that were more useful to him, and those that he was more interested in. Soon, such a course came. Charms. Hermione Granger. Sherlock Holmes. Harry Potter. The professor teaching charms was Phileas Flitwick, who was also the head of Ravenclaw House. Professor Flitwick was of goblin descent, so he was extraordinarily small. Sherlock estimated that he was less than 4 feet tall, or just over 1 meter. He had to stand on a stack of books to reach the lectern when teaching. The first class was to call the roll as usual. It was okay when he called other people's names, but when he called the name Harry Potter, he screamed excitedly and fell to the ground. This made Sherlock once again realize the lethality of the name Harry Potter in the magical world. Even figures at the level of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry's headmaster could not avoid it. At the same time, it once again proved that his choice to complete the pairing and assistance to Harry before the start of school was an incredibly correct one. Before school started, Malfoy and his 2 Slytherin cronies took the initiative to come to his door. After the start of school, these teachers and students who were paying attention to Harry naturally could not escape Sherlock's eyes, greatly facilitating his understanding of the magical world. At the same time, Sherlock unexpectedly discovered that Harry had the potential to become an assistant. This made him gradually abandon the idea of treating Harry as a tool person and begin to regard him as a friend he could make. Of course, this is a story for later, so let's not dwell on it for now. Professor Flitwick had a strong ability to self-regulate. It didn't take long for him to recover and start teaching. The content of the first class was similar to other courses, still a general overview of the course. At the same time, he also taught a basic charm, the mending charm. It was the charm that Sherlock had used on Harry's glasses on the Hogwarts Express. Chapter 25. The mending charm is a very practical spell, capable of restoring most damaged objects. In his first charms class, Sherlock's performance was consistent with his other subjects, constantly asking Professor Flitwick questions. As with other courses, his goal was to gain a comprehensive understanding of the subject. Unexpectedly, Professor Flitwick was very enthusiastic about studious wizards, and as a result, Sherlock not only achieved his expected goals but also gained additional benefits. He learned a very useful new spell from Flitwick, the warming charm. As the name suggests, casting the spell makes one feel warm all over, as if wearing a pair of fleece-lined long johns. This was very practical for Sherlock, who was just recovering from a serious illness and encountering such damp and cold weather. Others could only envy him. After all, very few students could skillfully master and apply the mending charm in the first lesson. Besides Sherlock, only Hermione and a few others could do it. But even Hermione found it difficult to spare the energy to learn new spells. This made her clench her small fist secretly. Holmes, I won't lose to you. The charms class on Tuesday afternoon was immediately followed by Transfiguration, making the schedule somewhat tight. This was especially true for the Gryffindor students. The main reason was Harry. Compared to their enthusiasm at breakfast in the Great Hall, the onlookers' reactions were even more exaggerated. Students without classes lined up outside the classroom, all standing on tiptoe, eager to see the true face of the hero who defeated the Dark Lord as a mere infant. In the corridors, these students were even more outrageous. They would walk past Harry, then turn back and stare at him intently. If it weren't too rude, they might even want to get closer to see what Harry's lightning-shaped scar looked like. Harry sincerely wished they wouldn't do this, because the way to the classroom was too difficult. One aspect was that the first-year students didn't know the way, and another was that the roads in Hogwarts were inherently difficult to find. The roads here changed at any time, some stairs led to different places at different times, some steps suddenly disappeared halfway, forcing people to remember where to jump, some doors were not real doors at all, but a solid wall that looked like a door. Even the people in the portraits constantly visited each other, making it impossible to use them as reference points. Everything was constantly moving, so it was very difficult to remember where things were. The students' strong interest in Harry further exacerbated this difficulty. "Sherlock, you're amazing!" Under Sherlock's guidance, Harry and Ron quickly passed through the disobedient stairs, jumped over 2 disappearing steps, bypassed the mischievous Peeves, and finally opened a door that didn't look like a door in the correct way. Harry couldn't help but praise him sincerely. "How do you remember such a complicated route?" Sherlock smiled slightly. "Actually, you can too." "Me?" Harry pointed to himself, looking bewildered. "Yes, dear Harry, I've actually told you many times, what you see is no different from what I see, so what I can do, you can do too." "That's impossible." Before Harry could answer, Ron interjected. "As far as I know, there isn't a single first-year student in the entire academy, no, the entire school who can remember all the correct routes to the classroom like you, even if you add the older students, I'm afraid only George and Fred can do it." Harry nodded repeatedly, obviously agreeing with Ron's statement. Sherlock leaned slightly to the side, dodging a ghost that suddenly jumped out from behind the door, the ghost's eyes showing a strong disappointment at his indifference. He explained, "Harry, remember when we first met, I said that you were sent to the station by your uncle, and you seemed very surprised at the time." "That's right." Recalling the scene when they first met, Harry still felt very surprised. "But after I told you the reasoning process, you felt that everything was so obvious." "Yes, every time I hear you talk about these reasoning, things always seem so obvious, almost ridiculously simple, and I can even reason myself." Harry scratched his head, asking puzzledly, "But before you explain the reasoning process, I always feel confused about every next step of your reasoning." "Me too." Ron interjected again, saying somewhat unconvinced, "But I still think our eyesight is no worse than yours." "What you said is actually not wrong." "Ah." Ron couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this. "Wait, I just said that casually, how did you really admit it? The problem is that you are looking instead of observing, and there is a clear difference between the two." Looking at Harry and Ron's bewildered expressions, Sherlock paused and continued, "For example, it's been 3 days since you came to school, do you know how many staircases there are in the castle?" "Harry, I don't know." "Ron, how is it possible to know that kind of thing?" "Because you didn't observe, you were just looking. That's exactly what I want to point out. Hogwarts has a total of 142 staircases, and there are 3 types of staircases, namely 9, 12, and 14 steps. The Gryffindor Tower is located in the east of the castle, its common room is on the 8th floor of the tower, and together with the Astronomy Tower and the Ravenclaw Tower, they are the 3 highest towers in the school. I know these things because I not only look but also observe." A word directly stunned Harry and Ron. "Okay, we've arrived at the classroom, let's talk about this topic later if you are interested." Because Sherlock led the way, the group arrived at the classroom 5 minutes before class. Even so, the classroom was still in a mess. Mainly because Professor McGonagall, who was responsible for teaching, had not yet arrived. She is the head of Gryffindor House and the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, known for her strictness and fairness. If she were in the classroom, the students would definitely not dare to be presumptuous. "Why is there a cat there?" Ron looked around the classroom and called out in surprise. Sherlock naturally noticed the kitten squatting on the podium earlier than him. After staring at the cat for a few seconds, a meaningful smile suddenly appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Harry, guess where this cat came from?" "Maybe it's Professor McGonagall's pet." Harry replied uncertainly. "Incorrect." "Incorrect." "Perfect, let me demonstrate to you the process of forming inferences through observation." In the surprised gazes of the surrounding people, Sherlock strode to the podium, grabbed the kitten by the scruff of its neck, and lifted it up.